Postcards from our second first love, on a future Valentine's Day in Paris. The city of rooftop terraces, candlelit dinners, and couples drifting along the Seine. They would meet again without meaning to, as if the city itself had been waiting for them. Party, but years before that terrace, before the candles, and the view of the Eiffel Tower, there was only the warmth of a small-town afternoon, and two 22-year-olds who believed love could fix absolutely anything. They met in the kind of cafe that never tried to be pretty, and somehow ended up beautiful anyway. The paint on the walls was the color of old coffee. The tables were scarred with initials and dates, and the bell on the door rang half a second too late every time someone walked in. She loved that delay. It felt like the place was shy. Her name was Maya. She sat near the window with a second-hand laptop and a notebook crowded with dreams. Cities circled on a map, quotes she'd copied from books, fragments of poems that weren't finished yet. Her hair was up in a messy knot that kept threatening to fall, and there was a faint shadow of exhaustion under her eyes, the kind that came from working too many shifts and studying too late into the night. Across the room, at a table littered with empty espresso cups and crumpled sugar packets, sat Adrian. Adrian never seemed to sit. Exactly. He lounged. His chair was tipped back on two legs, his arm draped over the back of another chair, as if he owned the air around him. There was charm in the way he smiled. All easy angles and careless warmth. The practiced charisma of someone who had been told many times that he was special and had decided to believe it. He was telling a story to two friends about a party the night before. Something about a rooftop and the police and someone's missing shoes. They laughed loudly. Too loudly for the quiet Thursday afternoon. But no one complained because the cafe was used to his noise. Adrian came here almost every day. Maya knew who he was. Long before he knew who she was. She had studied him in a safe, detached way. She studied other people, the way she observed strangers on buses and couples in parks. He was the kind of boy who always had a hand on someone's waist. The kind of boy who seemed to float from moment to moment, never touching ground long enough to leave a footprint. He was not at all the kind of boy she imagined for herself. And yet, that day, he noticed her. It started with something small. As most important things do. The cafe's only available outlet was beside her table. Adrian's phone was dying, and he hated when anything slipped out of his control. "Hey," he said, stopping at her table with a charger wrapped loosely around his fingers. "Do you mind if I steal your outlet for a bit? My entire social life is hanging by 2%. She looked up from her notebook, startled. Up close, his eyes were a warm hazel, framed by lashes that would have made most girls jealous. She told herself that noticing that meant nothing. "Sure," she said, closing her laptop slightly to make space. "But I charge by the minute." He laughed, the sound bright, easy. "What's the rate?" "One story," she answered, surprising herself. "A real one. Not the type you tell over there to impress your friends?" He glanced back at his table, where his friends were already absorbed in their own conversation. Then he turned fully toward her, as if the air had tilted and she was now the more interesting option. "Deal," he said. "I'm Adrian." "Maya." He pulled out the chair across from her, and sat, his charger plugged into the outlet, his phone abandoned between them like a truce. "A real story, huh?" he said. "You don't start with easy levels." "I don't believe in easy levels," she replied. The smile he gave her had a flicker of something different in it, something not meant for the crowd he usually performed for. "Okay," he said slowly. "Here's one." He told her about being 10 years old, sitting on the floor of his grandmother's house, in the countryside, watching snow fall through the window, while she told him stories about places she had never seen. He told her about the way she described Paris, her accent bending the word into something softer, like a secret. He admitted, with a half shrug, that he'd promised his grandmother he would go there one day and send her a postcard, but she had died before he got the chance. Maya listened, her fingers still resting on the spine of her notebook. The cafe hummed around them, milk steaming, spoons against porcelain, the low murmur of other lives. But the story narrowed the world down to his voice, and the fragile confession wrapped inside it. "You never went," she said gently. He shook his head. "Life happened." "Work, parties, people." His eyes dipped, then met hers again. "Excuses." "Basically, maybe not excuses," she said. "Maybe just detours." He tilted his head, studying her. You talk like someone who's read a lot of books. I talk like someone who wants a different life, she said, before she could stop herself. He smiled, but there was curiosity behind it now. And what life is that? She hesitated, then flipped open her notebook and turned it so he could see. On the inside cover she had taped a wrinkled, glossy postcard. The Eiffel Tower at sunset. Sky streaked in pink and orange. Tiny silhouettes on a balcony with coffee cups between them. Paris, she said, and felt ridiculous for the heat that rose to her cheeks, as if she'd just confessed a crush. I want to see this view with my own eyes one day. Drink coffee somewhere high enough that the city looks like it's been sprinkled with gold dust. He stared at the postcard for a moment, longer than she expected. Something in his expression softened, the practiced arrogance slipping to one side like a mask, coming loose. Paris, he echoed. My grandmother would like you. The bell on the door chimed its late, awkward note as someone else came in. But neither of them looked away. That was how it began. A dead phone battery. A borrowed outlet. A story traded for electricity. In the weeks that followed, Adrian became a fixture in her days. At first it was coincidence. They simply ended up in the cafe, at the same time, exchanging nods that turned into brief conversations. He teased her about the way she always ordered plain black coffee, even though she made a face at the first sip every time. She mocked his obsession with perfectly curated Instagram stories. You live like your life is a commercial, she told him once, watching as he angled his cup to catch the light. Maybe I'm selling something? He shot back. What? Exactly. Myself, he said, as if it were obvious. There's always an audience. Not everything has to be for them, she said softly, tapping his phone screen to dim it. Some moments get to be just for you. He looked at her then. Really looked, and for a heartbeat, his expression turned serious. And who are your moments for? Maya. She thought of her shift at the bookstore, the long evenings helping customers find novels she'd never have time to read herself. She thought of the way she fell asleep sometimes still in her work clothes, with a pen sliding from her fingers onto crumpled pages of unfinished poems. For the future, she said. I'm saving them. He laughed, but there was an edge to it. You talk like you're 80. You live like you'll never be 80. She countered. Somehow, that mix of seriousness, his carelessness sparked into something neither of them had expected. One rainy night, when the cafe closed early and the streets gleamed under streetlights, Adrian offered her his jacket and walked her home. They paused under the awning of her building, rain drumming on canvas above them, the scent of wet pavement and coffee between them. I'm bad news, he said suddenly, half joking, half warning. Ask literally anyone. Maybe I don't care what literally anyone thinks, she whispered. He kissed her then, quick and uncertain at first, then deeper when she didn't pull away. The world went blurry around the edges. For a moment it felt like every romantic scene she had ever imagined, every underlined sentence in the books she loved, had collapsed into this single breathless instant. They started seeing each other officially soon after, though officially was a word Maya clung to more tightly than Adrian did. She introduced him to her small circle of friends. He shrugged and introduced her, almost offhandedly, as my girl to his. The first weeks were the good part of every story. They walked hand in hand through markets and along the river, shared cheap takeout on the steps of old buildings, fell asleep tangled on her narrow bed, while some movie played unwatched on her laptop. He made her laugh with dumb impressions. She made him think in ways that unsettled him but also drew him in. They made lists of places they'd go when we have money. Barcelona, Kyoto, New York, and always, Paris at the top. She kept the postcard pinned above her desk. Sometimes, when they were both too tired to move, they would lie there and imagine it out loud. The terrace, the soft lights, the sound of the city below. One day, Adrian would say, tracing circles on her palm, you and me. There, coffee that isn't instant, clothes that aren't from the discount rack, no more counting coins before rent. One day, she'd echo, storing the promise like a fragile object on a high shelf inside her. But the cracks began early. The first time she found a message on his phone that wasn't meant for her, she told herself it was nothing. A heart emoji, from a girl whose name she recognized from his stories. A photo that was technically innocent, but captioned with a joke that wasn't. Are you flirting with her? she asked, trying to keep her voice light. He snatched the phone back, eyes flicking from the screen to her face. Relax. Maya, it's just how we talk. You know me? I thought I did, she said. He sighed, rolling his eyes in a way that made her feel 8 years old. Don't start. You're not like other girls. You don't need to be jealous. It was meant as a compliment. It didn't feel like one. Later, she would call this the first red flag. At the time, she called it a misunderstanding. Love, she had always been told, meant giving the benefit of the doubt. She gave it, over and over, until there was nothing left to give. The pattern grew familiar. He would cancel plans at the last minute with vague excuses. Something came up. The guys need me. You know how it is. And she'd end up alone in the cafe, hands wrapped around a cooling cup of coffee, convincing herself that he was just busy, that this was what adult relationships looked like. When she gathered the courage to say that his jokes sometimes cut too deep, that the way he teased her about her clothes, her salary, her naive little dreams hurt more than he seemed to realize. He laughed and called her sensitive. If you can't handle a joke, how are you going to handle the real world? He asked. I already handled the real world, she replied quietly. You just don't see it. And yet, between the sharp edges, there were still those dizzying, blinding moments of tenderness. Him showing up at her job with a sandwich because he knew she'd worked through lunch. Her waiting outside the club at 3 in the morning because he was too drunk to find a cab. Both of them curled on the floor of her tiny kitchen, eating cereal out of the box, and talking about childhood fears, until the sun rose. She told herself that all relationships were like this, a messy mix of laughter and tears, cruelty and apology. She had no other standard to measure by. He, for his part, found himself in unfamiliar territory. Adrian had never had to try in love. Affection came easy to him, and leaving came easier. Girls were fonts of admiration and distraction, their names blurring together in his memory. They were nights, not seasons. Maya was different. She challenged him in ways he didn't have the vocabulary to understand. When she looked at him, it wasn't with blind adoration but with something much more unsettling. Expectation. You could be more, she told him once, lying with her head on his chest. You desmato. Adorian, you could do something that matters. I matter, he said, offended. That's not what I mean. I mean something that lasts longer than a party. He didn't like thinking about longevity. The future, to him, was a blurry, distant thing, always postponed until after the next thrill. But with her, the future had a shape. It looked suspiciously like responsibility, like compromise, like reality. It scared him, so he did what he had always done when something scared him. He ran from it in small, casual ways. He stayed out later with friends. He let messages from her sit unread longer. He told stories to other girls at bars, hungry for their giggles, for the proof that he still could, that he wasn't being tamed. The second time she caught proof of his cheating, there was no way to pretend it was innocent. Eiffel Tower mistakaburu. A girl pressed too closely to him in a club, his hand somewhere. It had no right to be. Her caption tagging him with a winking face. Maya's hand shook as she held the phone. Her breath came in short, sharp bursts, like she'd been running. Tell me this is old, she said when he arrived at her apartment, shoulders tense with the knowledge that she'd found something. Tell me this is some joke. Why were you going through my phone? He snapped. Because you keep giving me reasons to. He paced the length of her small room, caged energy ricocheting off the walls. It was nothing, he insisted. You know how people are when they drink. I don't even remember half that night. But you remember enough not to answer my messages, she said. It's not a crime to have fun, Maya. It is when you promised me I was the only one. The argument spiraled, words flung like knives. He accused her of being controlling. She accused him of lying. He called her dramatic. She called him selfish. There were tears, raised voices, a moment when she almost told him to leave, and almost didn't take it back. In the end, he apologized. He always did. He knew just what words to use, how to make his voice raw with remorse. How to say, I'm sorry. Like it was a confession scraped from the bottom of his soul. I'm scared, he admitted that night, sitting on the edge of her bed, his hands covering his face. I don't know how to do this, okay? I don't know how to be with one person. With you? It feels bigger. Like if I mess it up, I'll never forgive myself. So I mess it up first. On purpose. Before it can collapse on its own. She sat beside him, heart twisting at the vulnerability in his tone. You don't have to sabotage it, she whispered. You can just choose it. Choose me. He lifted his head, eyes red. I'm trying. And because she loved him, because love, at 22, felt like an absolute rather than a negotiable, she believed him. Time passed. They built routines that wove their lives tighter together. Sunday mornings, at the flea market. Tuesday nights cooking something from a recipe they found online. Whispered talks under blankets about quitting jobs they hated. About moving away. About the children they might have someday. He even put in more effort at work, chasing a promotion that promised a better salary. A clearer path forward. For a while, it looked like things were getting better. Then came the opportunity. It arrived in the form of an email with a foreign company's logo in the corner, offering Adrian a position in another country. The city on the contract was far away, across an ocean and several time zones. The salary a number that made his head spin. He'd applied on a whim months before, barely remembering the details. He hadn't expected to hear back. Now here it was. Possibility condensed into a paragraph. He called her that evening, voice buzzing with energy. Come to the cafe, he said. I need to tell you something. When she walked in, her heart jumped at the brightness on his face. He stood to meet her, grabbing her hands, spinning her once in the middle of the floor. I got the job, he said, the one abroad. They want me. He said it like a victory, like a plot twist in a movie about ambition and escape. For a heartbeat, Maya smiled, because he was excited, and she loved him. And that combination had always been enough to make her heart leap. That's amazing, she said. And she meant it. Where? He named the city. It rolled off his tongue like a spell. She pictured him there, in new clothes, under different lights, laughter echoing off unfamiliar walls. She pictured herself there, Tawar tried to. What about us? She asked quietly. When the first rush of celebration had ebbed, he sobered, pulling her into the corner booth they always claimed. That's what I wanted to talk to you about. They sat facing each other, the cafe suddenly too small to contain the possibilities between them. Outside, the sky was melting from blue to gold, the world moving through its daily magic, entirely unaware of the two people whose lives were teetering on the edge of a choice. I've been thinking, Adrian said slowly. I could go first, get settled, find an apartment, figure out how everything works. Then, once I'm stable, you come join me. 6 months, maybe less, we'll finally have money. We'll be able to travel, to do all the things we talk about. We could go to Paris, she finished, a strange hollowness opening in her chest. Exactly, he said, lighting up again. We'd be closer. We could spend weekends there if we wanted. Imagine it, May. That terrace you always talk about, the view, the coffee. We'd make it real. As he spoke, she saw it. The postcard scene. No longer flat and glossy but alive. The balcony. The golden light. His hand over hers. A life rebooted in a new city. Far from the ghosts of their mistakes. But alongside that dream, marched another image. Herself, alone in a strange country. Isolated from family and friends. Tethered entirely to a man who had already proven he could wound her deeply. And then convince her to stay. He reached across the table, covering her hand with his. Say yes, he murmured. Tell me you'll come. She searched his face. For once, his eyes were steady. The usual flicker of distraction was gone. She saw fear there. Yes, and excitement. And a boy who had never learned how to love slowly, now desperate to hold on to the one person who made him want to try. I'll come, she heard herself say. And she meant it. In that moment. Or, thought she did. The following weeks were a blur. He started the paperwork. She began quietly pruning her life. Selling books she loved because shipping them would be expensive. Folding clothes into neat piles for donation. They had long conversations about the logistics of visas and jobs. About where she might work when she arrived. About the timeline. 6 months? He repeated. Every time. I'll call you every day. We'll make this work. You'll see. She nodded, smiled, kissed him goodbye at the airport weeks later. throat tight enough to ache. They clung to each other near the departure gate, announcements droning over their heads in 2 languages, the smell of coffee and fuel heavy in the air. "Promise me you'll come," he said, gripping her shoulders. "Promise me you'll be someone I can come to," she replied, the words escaping before she could soften them. He flinched, then nodded. "I will. I am now, I swear. Maya, I love you. You know that, right?" "I love you. I love you too," she said, because it was true. Loving him had never been the problem. She watched him walk away, watched his figure shrink down the corridor until it dissolved into a stream of travelers. When he disappeared from sight, something inside her cracked. Not like glass shattering, but like ice splitting under the first hard thaw. That night, alone in her room, she lay on her back and stared at the postcard above her desk. The Eiffel Tower glowed against an impossible sky, unbothered by visas, or flight times, or the way people broke each other without meaning to. Her phone lit up with his messages, photos from the plane, from the airport on the other side, voice notes full of static and rush and plans. So many plans. For a few days, she answered with enthusiasm she tried to make real. She wrote long paragraphs about her day, about the customers at the bookstore, about her attempts to learn the language of the country she was meant to move to. He responded, with snapshots of his new life. The modern office, the view from his temporary room, the neon wash of the city at night. But something had shifted. Maybe it was the silence between his messages, when he was out with new coworkers. Those blank hours that felt uncomfortably like the old patterns in new packaging. Maybe it was the way his stories already included new names, colleagues, acquaintances, people he described with the same bright spark he once used for everyone else. Maybe it was simply the distance, spelling out what she hadn't wanted to read. One evening, sitting alone at the cafe where they'd first met, Maya listened to the echo of his laughter through her speaker. He was talking about a bar his new colleagues had taken him to, about how wild the night had been, about how the women there were insane. "I wish you could have seen it," he said. "I wish. You wish I had been there?" she replied. There was a pause. "Of course I do," he said. But the words landed oddly, as if they'd been picked up off the floor and dusted off rather than grown inside his chest. After they hung up, she closed her eyes and let the murmur of the cafe wash over her. Cups clinked. Someone laughed. A song played softly from the old speakers. Something about losing and finding yourself. She thought about the girl she had been a year ago. Notebook full of dreams, insisting that geography couldn't hold her back. When had her dreams narrowed to a single person? She remembered the nights he'd made her feel small, the casual cruelty dressed as humor, the apologies that came only when she was halfway out the door. She remembered the way she'd curled around the ache in her chest, convincing herself that this was what love demanded. She thought of following him to a country she had never seen, without a support system, without a safety net, tethered to a man whose promises had always come with fine print. For the first time, she allowed herself to ask the question she had been pushing away since the day he told her about the job. What if loving him wasn't enough? The answer came slowly, like dawn, seeping into a dark room, outlining the furniture of her life in a new light. She had always believed that love was a reason to stay. It hadn't occurred to her that it might also be a reason to leave. To protect the part of her that still believed in softness, in faith, in waking up one day and not doubting her own worth. In the weeks that followed, she spoke less when he called. She listened more. She noticed how often his stories centered on himself, how rarely he asked follow-up questions about her day. She noticed that when she did share something vulnerable of fear, a small victory, a bad dream, he reacted with distraction, with a joke, with a quick "you'll be fine" before redirecting the spotlight back to his new world. He wasn't cruel. Not deliberately. He just didn't know how to hold anyone's heart but his own. One night, after a particularly long call, where he'd been half drunk and giddy, telling her about a coworker who had tried to kiss him. And how, of course I said no. Don't get mad. But you should have seen her. Maya hung up and stared at her reflection in the dark window. She looked tired. Older than 23. There was a set to her jaw she didn't recognize. She thought of the girl he'd described, the coworker with the too loud laugh and the dress that had barely been there. 5 years from now? That girl would be a memory he could barely place. 5 years from now? Who would Maya be if she kept bending herself around his gravity? The decision came like a tide, unstoppable once it began to move. She stayed up all night, writing, not to him, At first, to herself, pages and pages in her notebook. Every hurt she had swallowed, every time she had told herself it wasn't that bad, every apology she had accepted because the alternative was losing him. She wrote about their good moments too, because they deserved to exist somewhere other than in the shadows of the bad. She wrote until her hand ached, until the sun pushed gray into her room. Then, with fingers that trembled but did not hesitate, she picked up her phone. She did not call. She wrote a message. It wasn't long or poetic. It wasn't a list of grievances. She knew him well enough to know he would argue with details, spin them into something manageable. She didn't want a debate. She wanted an ending. Adorian, I love you. That's not in question. It never has been. But I can't build my whole life on loving you and hoping you'll someday be the person I need. I'm tired of trying to heal from wounds you keep reopening. I'm tired of seeing my future only in the reflection of your eyes. So, I'm not coming. I hope you find what you're looking for. I hope I do, too. Please don't call. This has to be goodbye. Maya, she read it. Twice. A third time, her chest felt like it was being sawed open. Each word, a new tear. Then she hit send before she could change her mind. The message left. A pale blue bubble on the screen. Delivered. Almost immediately, the typing indicator appeared. It blinked, vanished, appeared again. She turned the phone, face down on the table, before the reply could arrive. For a while, the device buzzed, relentlessly. Calls, messages, voice notes. His name lit up her screen again and again. Pleading, anger, confusion, compressed into digital insistence. She powered the phone off. For the first time since she'd met him, there was real silence. In another country, thousands of miles away, Adrian stared at the notification, heartbeat pounding in his ears. The words blurred, sharpened, blurred again. He called her, again and again, pacing his tiny temporary apartment, knocking into furniture, cursing when the calls went to voicemail. This isn't funny, Maya, he said into the empty room. You can't do this. We had a plan. You said you'd come. I love you. You can't just... But she could. She had. Over the following days, his messages shifted, tone shock curdling into anger, anger dissolving into desperate apology, apology looping back to blame. After everything, you're just leaving. How can you do this to us? I know I screwed up, but you're overreacting. I need you. Please. I'll change. I've already changed. You're cruel. Maya, you're running away because you're scared. Somewhere among the flood of words, he realized that none of them were reaching her. His calls never rang. His texts stayed marked as delivered, but unread. He checked her social media obsessively, looking for signs, new pictures, new comments, proof that she was hurting at least as much as he was. Her profiles went quiet. Then one by one, he lost access. Blocked. It stunned him. The finality of that invisible wall. For the first time, someone had left and refused to look back. Friends told him that maybe she wasn't worth it, that he was better off, that the world was full of other options. He nodded, went out with coworkers, drowned the echo of her name in noise and strangers. He collected nights again, as he had before her, but they felt shallow, like drinking salt water when he was dying of thirst. He missed her laugh when it was just for him. He missed the way she saw through his performative charm, the way she kept postcards of places she hadn't seen yet, the way she believed there was a future version of him worth waiting for. He started working more, chasing the success the new job dangled in front of him, as if a bigger apartment or a higher salary would fill the absence she'd carved out by leaving. He told himself, again and again, that she'd regret it, that one day she'd look for him online and see how well he was doing, see the photos of him in expensive restaurants and think, I could have had that. He did not admit, even to himself, that he checked his own reflection sometimes, and wondered if he would recognize the man she had hoped he might become. Back in their hometown, Maya rebuilt herself, piece by piece. The first weeks were brutal. There were mornings she woke up reaching for her phone, ready to send him a meme or a photo of the way the sunrise looked from her window, only to remember the break she had chosen. There were nights when she clutched a pillow and sobbed into it, grief and guilt and longing tangled together, until she couldn't tell where one ended and the others began. Her friends called her brave. Some people called her cruel. A mutual acquaintance messaged her once, saying, "He's devastated, you know? I can't believe you just cut him off like that." She typed a dozen replies, erased them all, and settled on, "Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for both of you is to walk away." She found a therapist. She started eating better. She picked up extra hours at work, then applied for a job that paid more, using Adrian's move as a shove to change her own circumstances instead of clinging to the shadow of his. Months slid into years. Her life expanded into spaces she hadn't known she'd left empty. New friends, new routines, occasional dates that never quite turned into anything more. Not because the people were terrible, though some were, but because the echo of what she'd felt for Adrian was still too loud. She wanted love again. Someday, a different kind of love. One that didn't require her to shrink. Adrian, for his part, learned the hard edges of solitude in a foreign city, then learned how to smooth them with work, with acquaintances, with short-term warmth that never threatened to become something deeper. He collected experiences instead of attachments, stamped his passport, grew his savings, told himself that this freedom, this abundance, was all he had ever wanted. 5 years passed. They did not speak. They did not write. They became ghosts in each other's stories, names that caught on the edge of the tongue and were swallowed back down. The world changed around them. Jobs, governments, prices, trends. They changed too, in quieter ways. Maya's hair grew longer. Adrian's eyes grew older. They both learned to navigate airports with the ease of seasoned travelers, to read maps in cities they'd once only pointed to in atlas. On a cold morning in February, each of them, alone in separate countries, booked flights for a vacation they felt, without quite knowing why, that they had earned. Parties, they chose it for different reasons. For Maya, it was an old promise she wanted to claim for herself at last, no longer tied to any version of we. For Adrian, it was a half-remembered dream, from a grandmother's stories and a younger self's vow. The postcard image he had once explored through someone else's eyes, and now wanted to see with his own. Neither of them knew that the city of love had been quietly waiting, its balconies and cafes and glowing tower patient as only stone and steel and centuries can be. Neither of them knew that, 5 years after a goodbye, that felt like an ending. Faytand, a small, flower-draped terrace on a Valentine's Day evening, was about to offer them a different kind of beginning. On Valentine's Day, Paris swelled with visitors who had crossed oceans just to bathe for a few days in its reputation as the world's capital of romance. Party. Alibaba +1. Maya watched them from the back seat of a rideshare as it slipped through the city like a dark stone through water. Every traffic light, every crosswalk, seemed to reveal another couple. Fingers laced, foreheads touching, scarves tangled together as if the wind itself wanted them to stay close. The sky was turning the color of apricot and ash, and already the Eiffel Tower shimmered faintly in the distance, a promise written in metal and light. Her friends chatted around her. 3 women squeezed into one car, perfume and laughter thick in the air. Lila was scrolling through restaurant options, narrating each one with a squeal. Camila was fussing with her lipstick in the reflection of her phone screen. Nina kept leaning forward to ask the driver for recommendations in rusty French. "And you?" Lila asked suddenly, nudging Maya with her elbow. "You okay back there? Dream girl, you've been staring out the window like you're in a music video." "I'm fine," Maya said, smiling because it was easier than explaining the knot in her chest. "Just taking it in." "Take it in tonight," Camila said. "For now, we need to check into the apartment before the others arrive. The couple's flights land in an hour, and you know, they'll hog the bathroom." "Let them," Nina added, with a smirk. "At least, we won't have to pretend we're not third-wheeling. We can be our own wheel. A sexy, independent wheel." They laughed, and for a moment the sound drowned out the hum of unease under Maya's ribs. It had been her idea to come. In the end, a late-night impulse, after a particularly long week at work, when she'd clicked through photos of European cities, until the familiar outline of the Eiffel Tower had filled her screen. Paris had been hovering at the edge of her life for years, a ghost of a dream she'd once shared with someone else. It was time, she'd decided, to reclaim it. "It's just a place," she had told herself as she booked the tickets. He doesn't own it. Your past doesn't either. But now, as the car curved around a corner, and the river flashed briefly between buildings, sleek, dark, banded with bridges, she felt him like a memory pressed against the glass. Not as a presence she would ever see again, but as a version of herself she had finally outgrown and yet couldn't quite forget. 5 years. In 5 years, she had built a life that fit her like a well-worn sweater. She had moved into a brighter apartment, one with plants that somehow stayed alive, and a small balcony she filled with second-hand furniture. She had climbed the slow, frustrating ladder of her career, until she found herself in a role that paid well enough, and left room in her brain for her own projects. She had written poems she did not show anyone, stories that stacked up on her hard drive like quiet waiting rooms. She had dated a little, enough to prove to herself that attraction was not a finite resource, that the world did not begin and end with a pair of hazel eyes and a crooked smile. Still, every time something new began to feel serious, something in her stiffened. "You're kind," she had told one man who wanted to meet her friends. "You're almost perfect," she had thought silently, as she turned down another man's offer of a weekend away. "You're not him," some stubborn, foolish part of her answered, every time. She hated that part. She had tried to starve it, and yet, here it was, sitting up in the back of the car. As Paris unfolded, awake, alert, listening, the apartment they had rented was on the 5th floor of a narrow building with a wrought iron railing that curled like script along the balconies. Inside, it smelled of old floorboards and lemon cleaner. The windows opened onto a view of rooftops, chimneys and slate, the Eiffel Tower's top half stenciled against the sky. "Okay, I forgive you for making us climb all those stairs," Lila said, breathless, as she pushed open the tall windows. Cold air spilled in, smelling faintly of bread and distant exhaust. "This is insane." Maya stepped beside her. For a long moment, she said nothing. "Are you crying?" Nina asked softly. "No," Maya lied, blinking quickly. "Just jet lag." They settled in. Suitcases exploded into piles of clothes. Someone connected to the Bluetooth speaker and put on a playlist called Paris Nights. The couples arrived an hour later, 2 of Maya's male friends and their girlfriends, all warmth and inside jokes. There were hugs and squeals, plans tossed into the air like confetti. "Okay, tonight is for couples," one of them announced. "Tomorrow, we do something as a group. But it's Valentine's. We need to do the full cliché. Candlelit dinner. Maybe a boat on the Seine if we can get a reservation. We're happy to leave you romantics to it," Nina said. "I plan to make out with a creme brulee. And I plan to make out with sleep," Maya added, earning a sympathetic laugh. "You guys, go do your couple thing. We'll be fine." They pretended it didn't sting, being the ones without dinner reservations or hands to hold. They toasted with cheap champagne bought from the corner shop. They took photos on the balcony, everyone crowding in and shouting over each other, the tower gleaming faintly behind them. Later, when the couples had disappeared into the Paris night heels, clicking down the stairs, perfume trailing after them, Maya and her 2 single friends sat cross-legged on the floor with a map spread between them. "Okay," Lila said, drawing circles with a pen. "Tomorrow, Ruburu?" "Definitely," Maya said. "I need to see the Winged Victory in person or my inner 16-year-old will riot." "And tonight?" Nina asked, tilting her head. "We could go out." "Haindoeba." "Pretend we're French. Or, we could just walk," Maya suggested. "No plan. Just follow whatever street looks pretty." Nina groaned. "You and your poetic walks." But in the end, they were tired, and the city outside the window felt big and glittering and slightly too much for their first night. One by one, they peeled off toward showers and pajamas. By 9, the apartment was quiet. Maya stood alone at the open window in a borrowed sweater, watching the pale strokes of headlights on the streets below. Somewhere, not so far away, people were clinking glasses in dim restaurants, leaning in over candlelight. Somewhere, a violinist was probably playing on a bridge, because sometimes life was obvious like that. She thought of calling someone her mother, perhaps, or an old friend, but the moment passed. Instead, she pulled on her coat, wrapped a scarf around her neck, and slipped quietly out, her footsteps soft on the stairwell. Adrian arrived in Paris full of noise. He'd flown in with a group of friends from work, the kind of people who thought nothing of spending a long weekend in another country on a whim. They had spent the flight drinking tiny bottles of wine, swapping stories loud enough for the entire cabin to hear, already making bets about who would flirt with whom, in which bar. He laughed with them, because laughing was still his first language. Yet underneath, there was a thread of tension he could not quite name. When the plane began its descent, he found himself staring out the window, with his forehead pressed to the cold glass. The city spread beneath them in a mosaic of pale stone and snaking roads, the river flashing like a slow blade. There it was, the tower, smaller from this angle than it had ever been in his mind, and yet somehow more real. His chest clenched. He remembered being 10 on his grandmother's worn rug, watching snow and hearing stories about this place. He remembered being 22 in a shabby cafe, listening to Maya trace a future around a postcard of the same skyline now hovering beneath him. He did not let himself follow the memory farther. He had gotten good at that over the last 5 years. Stopping the film before the painful scene, they checked into a modern hotel with too bright lighting and an overly cheery receptionist. His friends had booked rooms on the same floor, doors already propped open so they could shout at one another while they unpacked. Someone blasted music. Someone else raided the minibar. "Tonight, we go hard," one of them declared, clapping Adrian on the back. "This is Paris, man. If we don't fall in love at least 3 times before Monday, we're doing it wrong." Adrian grinned on reflex. "You know me," he said. "Never a problem." It wasn't a lie. Not exactly. He had kept moving since Maya. Girlfriends that lasted a few months at most. Flings that lasted a weekend. Names saved in his phone as inside jokes. They came and went, each one briefly convincing him that he was still the person he had been before. Untethered, unattached, invulnerable. Except he wasn't. Not really. There were nights, alone in his high-rise apartment, when he stared at the ceiling and realized that he could not remember the last time someone had asked him a question that wasn't easy to answer. There were mornings when the sunlight hit a certain way, and he thought, for a heartbeat, that he heard Maya's voice from the kitchen, only to be met with the silence of a space he had deliberately kept clean of shared history. He thought of reaching out to her sometimes. Curiosity, he told himself. Closure, just to see if she was okay, if she was happy, if she still liked black coffee, even though she made a face at it. But her social media accounts remained cautiously curated, and he knew better than to try to barrel past the boundaries she had drawn so clearly all those years ago. He watched from a distance when he stumbled upon her name through mutual friends. A photo at a conference, a blurry shot of her at some rooftop party, laughing at something someone else had said. She looked older, but so did he. There were new lines at the corners of her eyes that suggested both tiredness and joy. "She looks fine," he had muttered to himself once, more relieved than he wanted to admit. He tried not to think about her more than that. Yet, when his friends scattered to their respective rooms to change for their dates because, of course, they had dates, they had matched with people before they even landed, Adrian found himself standing at his own window, staring out at the city with an unfamiliar emptiness in his hands. "So, who are you meeting?" One of his coworkers called from the hallway, half-dressed, a shirt hanging open. "No one," Adrian said, surprising himself with the answer. The other man raised his brows. "On Valentine's in Paris? You slip in, man." Adrian shrugged, forcing a cocky smile. "I'm giving the rest of you a chance." When the door closed, he exhaled slowly. He could have arranged something. There were apps for that. There were always people looking for a story to tell their friends later. "I met this guy in Paris. Can you believe it?" For a moment, he almost opened one of those apps, thumb hovering over the icon. Instead, he put his phone in his pocket, grabbed his coat, and left the room. He told himself he just wanted to see the city. It was an excuse he almost believed. Paris at dusk was everything both of them had imagined, and nothing like it at all. Maya walked without a plan, letting the streets choose her. She drifted past bakeries with fogged-up windows and displays of pastries that looked like small, deliberate miracles. She wandered through pockets of quiet where the only sign of life was the clink of dishes from behind closed shutters. Then, suddenly, she would turn a corner and stumble into a plaza, strung with lights and laughter, the air sharp with the scent of wine and garlic and something sweet. She passed couples taking selfies by ornate fountains. She passed a florist carrying a bucket of roses so red they seemed almost artificial. She passed a group of teenagers sitting on the curb, passing a cigarette between them. Their conversations a staccato of French that brushed past her ears like music. She did not feel lonely. Exactly. More. Separate. As if everyone else were part of a choreography she had declined to rehearse. When her feet began to ache, she paused at a corner to check her phone. The screen was full of messages from the group chat. Lila. The restaurant has a harpist.
A harp.
Nina. The waiter just winked at me. Send help. One of the couples had sent a picture of the Seine at night. Bridges lit like necklaces across the water. Another message announced that they had tickets for a late-night cruise. Maya smiled and typed, I'm just wandering. Found the cutest side street. Don't worry about me. Enjoy your romance novel. You animals? She tucked the phone away. Across the city, Adrian threaded his way through a different crowd. His friends had disappeared into cabs heading toward clubs and restaurants with waiting lists. He walked instead, hands shoved in his pockets, turning left when he meant to go right, letting the city confuse and redirect him. He passed a bookstore with tables spilling out onto the sidewalk, all the covers in French. He paused, imagining the way Maya once ran her fingers along spines as if they were the backs of beloved friends. Stop it, he told himself. He moved on. The night grew colder. Street lamps flickered on, casting gold nets across cobblestones. Somewhere a saxophone played, the notes long and lonely. The air smelled of chestnuts roasting and, occasionally, cigarette smoke. Unwittingly, both of them were pulled toward the same part of the city, a district of old stone buildings and sloping roofs, where narrow streets opened like secrets into unexpected plazas. There, on a corner that looked unremarkable until you stepped through, a staircase led up to a small terrace cafe that seemed almost suspended above the city. Maya found it first. She saw the entrance by accident, catching only a warm spill of light at the edge of her vision. Curious, she followed a few other patrons up the worn steps. At the top, the world unfolded. The terrace was framed by ornate columns wrapped in tumbling pink flowers, each petal catching the glow of golden lamps. Round tables clustered near the balustrade, their surfaces scattered with candles whose flames danced in the faint breeze. Beyond, the city stretched out in a dark tapestry pricked with windows and streetlights. And there, in the distance, the Eiffel Tower rose, like an exclamation point, its lights flickering to life in slow waves. For a moment, Maya forgot to breathe. It was almost obscene, how much it resembled the postcard that had once lived above her desk. Not exactly the same. Of course the frame here was living stone and wood rather than glossy paper, but close enough that some younger version of herself startled awake. She wove between tables, heart beating faster, searching for a spot. Most were occupied by couples leaning close over dessert, their faces soft in the candlelight. At one, a man slid a ring across the table. At another, a woman wiped away tears with the back of her hand as her partner kissed her knuckles. It should have hurt to watch, but there was something oddly comforting about their happiness, as if the city were capable of holding many versions of love at once. Near the corner of the terrace, she found an empty table for two. She sat, shrugging off her coat, letting the ambient warmth from heat lamps sink into her shoulders. A server appeared as if conjured, speaking in gentle English when her halting French stumbled. UNCF, Shirubu PLA, TC Setto. Maybe something sweet. Surprise me. He nodded with a small smile and disappeared. She wrapped her hands around the small ceramic cup when it arrived. Inhaling the bitter steam, the first sip made her wince. Some habits, it seemed, were unbreakable. As she sat there, the sounds around her faded into a low, pleasant murmur. She looked at the tower, at the sky, at the pink flowers framing everything like a dream someone had insisted on making real. She thought, inevitably, of Adrian. Would he have laughed at how perfectly cliché it all was, or would he have fallen silent, the way he sometimes did when beauty knocked him unexpectedly sideways? Would he have complained about the tiny portions of European desserts? Or would he have remembered, the way she did, every cheap pastry they had once shared on cracked pavements far away from here? Stop, she whispered to herself. He is another life. But the thought did not listen. At that exact moment, Adrian was hesitating at the bottom of the same stairs. He had wandered into the plaza without expectation, drawn by the glow above. A woman descended past him, laughing at something her companion said, the scent of floral perfume trailing behind them. He looked up and saw the terrace. Lanterns, flowers, a slice of the tower. His heart kicked. It was, absurdly, exactly, the kind of place Maya had described years ago, her hand tracing invisible shapes in the air as she spoke of balconies, and coffee, and golden horizons. He almost turned away. The smart thing would be to keep walking, to find a bar, to lose himself in noise, and forget that there were places in the world that lined up to perfectly with the ghosts in his head. But something heavier than nostalgia moved his feet. Before he could talk himself out of it, he climbed. At the top, the view hit him like a physical force. He stopped just inside the terrace. Breath caught, the air smelled of sugar and espresso and flowers. Laughter rose and fell around him, a tide he did not yet belong to. The tower winked conspiratorially in the distance. He scanned the tables for a free seat, ignoring, at first, the people occupying them. He saw a spot near the balustrade. The second chair empty. A coat slung over the back of the first. The woman at that table lifted her coffee cup, profile illuminated by candlelight. His brain registered the curve of her cheek, the shape of her mouth, the slope of her shoulders before his heart could catch up. No. It was impossible. The years between them rose like a wall. The last message she'd sent, the ones he had hurled against the silence afterward, the time he'd spent convincing himself that she existed now only in some other orbit, far from his. But then she turned her head, and there was no room left for denial. Maya. Her hair was longer, waves tumbling past her shoulders. There was a new steadiness in the set of her jaw, and a kind of quiet confidence in the way she occupied her space. She was older. Yes, so was he. But the tilt of her gaze as she surveyed the city, the tiny crease between her brows when she thought too hard, that was the same. He stood frozen, one hand on the back of an empty chair at a neighboring table, eyes locked on her like a lighthouse after too many storms. 100 possible reactions flashed through him. Call her name, turn around, laugh, cry, pretend not to see. Each felt both too much and not enough. She felt it before she saw Etha prickle on the back of her neck that comes from being watched. Slowly, almost reluctantly, Maya turned her head. Their eyes met. For 2 beats of silence, the world narrowed to the thin distance between their gazes. In that silence, 5 years unspooled. Airports and apartments, promotions and small heartbreaks. All the mornings they had woken up in different cities and not thought of each other, and all the nights they had and lied about it, even to themselves. Adrian's first instinct was to smile, automatic and dazzling, the way he met any unexpected encounter. But the curve of his mouth faltered halfway, tipping into something rawer, more uncertain. Maya's fingers tightened around her cup. The ceramic was hot. She welcomed the sting. He was real, not a ghost conjured by nostalgia, not an imagined silhouette in someone else's crowd. Real, in worn jeans and a dark coat, hair slightly mussed by the wind, eyes the exact shade she remembered, only now etched at the edges with fine, tired lines. Of all the cities, of all the terraces, of all the nights, she could have looked away. She knew that. She could have given a small, polite, nada acknowledgement one grants an old acquaintance and then turned back to the view, letting him become just another story. I saw him once in Paris. Can you believe it? Instead, she held his gaze. He recovered first. Maya, he said, her name tasting strange and familiar on his tongue. His voice reached her across the gap between tables, low and incredulous. It hit her like a chord struck on an old instrument. Adrian, she replied, and the syllables seemed to fold the air between them, bringing the past closer. Time? Hiccuped. He took a step closer, then another, until he stood near her table. The second chair, the one facing the city, was still empty. He did not sit. Wow, he said softly, because what else was there to say? Of all places. Of all days, she added, glancing meaningfully at the roses on nearby tables, at the couples leaning into each other. They were not one of those couples. The knowledge sat between them like a third presence. Solid. Undeniable. "How are you?" he asked, because people always asked that, even when the question was too small for what they really meant. "Good," she said. "I'm good." It wasn't a lie. It wasn't the whole truth either. But then, neither was his quiet. "Yeah, same." Silence, stretched, taut, both of them fumbling for a script that didn't exist. He could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. He suddenly became intensely aware of how he must look too casual, overdressed, and hated himself for caring. He had not expected to feel 17 again, worried about the impression he made on the girl who mattered. Her eyes flicked toward the empty chair at her table. For one suspended second, he thought she might invite him to sit with a word, a gesture. Instead, she glanced away, reached for her phone, and something in his chest clenched with sudden, ridiculous panic. She's going to leave, he thought, disappear again. And this time, there would be no chance to protest. Without fully deciding to, he moved. He walked past her table and took the empty seat at the one just behind it, angled, so that if he turned slightly, he could still see her in his peripheral vision. It was cowardly and hopeful all at once. Close enough to stay in her orbit, distant enough to pretend it was an accident if she chose to ignore him. The server appeared at his elbow. Adrian ordered something without thinking, an espresso, maybe, or a whiskey. He wasn't sure. His palms were damp. He pulled out his phone, more for something to do with his hands than any real need to check it. Her profile photo stared back at him from the top of his chat list, exactly where it had been, for years. He had never deleted the conversation, he had simply stopped opening it. The last message from Hertha, one that had ended them, sat at the bottom, unfaded by time. "Please, don't call. This has to be goodbye." His thumb hovered over her name, every sensible instinct screaming at him that this was absurd. She was right there. He could stand, cross the space between them, say some variation of, "Can we talk?" But the thought of approaching her physically, of forcing her to respond in front of all these strangers, felt wrong. Too sudden. Too much. Besides, he remembered the way she had cut him off so decisively 5 years ago. Contact zero. Like a surgeon cauterizing a wound. If she wanted to keep that distance, he did not want to strip her of the choice. On the screen, the faint green dot next to her name pulsed. Online. She had her phone in her hand, he realized, probably checking messages from friends. The way tourists did. His heart shoved itself up into his throat. A ridiculous idea formed. Half romantic, half pathetic. He opened their chat. The empty text field blinked at him, the cursor like a tiny heartbeat. What could he possibly say that wouldn't sound either trivial or overwhelmingly loaded? "Hi, too small. I know this is insane, but can we talk?" "Too much," he erased, typed, erased again, fingers trembling. Finally, he wrote, "Can I come say hello, properly?" He stared at the sentence. It was simple, polite, leaving room for refusal. It acknowledged their shared history without demanding anything of it. He hit send before he could chicken out. Across the terrace, Maya's phone vibrated. She glanced down, expecting a message from her friends about some restaurant mishap or a photo of someone's dessert. Instead, she saw his name. For a split second, she thought it was an old notification glitching back to life. Then she read the message. "Can I come say hello properly?" Her pulse thudded in her throat so hard it blurred her vision. The past and present telescoped. She could feel him behind her, the nearness of his presence like heat against her back. The little typing indicator appeared and disappeared, as if he'd started to write something else and stopped. Her first instinct was to get up and leave, to preserve the hard-won peace she had bled for 5 years to build, to walk down those stairs and into a different story. Instead, she lifted her head and turned slowly in her chair. Their eyes met again. He held his phone in one hand, the other resting uncertainly on his knee. In the soft gold light, he looked both exactly like the boy she'd once loved, and nothing like him at all. There was humility in the set of his shoulders now, an openness in his gaze she did not remember. He didn't smile, this time. He simply waited. Maya's throat felt tight. She forced herself to breathe. Then, very slowly, she nodded. The motion was small. It felt enormous. Something eased in his expression, a tension she hadn't known he was holding. He stood, almost too quickly, bumping his knee against the table. His glass rattled. He caught it with clumsy fingers, cheeks flushing. The old Adrian would have turned even that into a joke, into a performance. This one just looked briefly embarrassed, and then crossed the space between them. Every step measured. "Is this seat taken?" he asked softly, motioning to the chair opposite hers. "Yes," she said, and his face flickered until, she added, "By you." He exhaled a breath that sounded suspiciously like a laugh strangled halfway. He sat. For a moment, neither of them knew where to put their hands. The candles on the table cast their faces in flickering warmth, making strangers of their own features. "So?" he said finally, because silence was beginning to feel like its own kind of drowning. "You made it." "Made what?" she asked. "Hit it. Hit it." He gestured at the terrace. "The view. The tower. Paris. Your postcard." She glanced out at the city, then back at him. "Yeah," she said. "Seems we both did." His eyes soft. "My grandmother would be thrilled." "I remember," she said quietly. "You promised her a postcard?" "I sent one," he said. "The first time I traveled for work, actually, not to an address. Obviously. I just mailed it. Felt stupid. Felt right. Felt right." Maya smiled. A small, involuntary curve of her lips. "Of course you did." The server arrived, interrupting the fragile intimacy of the moment. Adrian ordered something this time with full awareness, coffee black, out of habit. "Still torturing yourself with bitter drinks," Maya observed, says the woman who winces. "Every time she sips hers," he countered. The familiarity of the banter startled them both. It was like stepping onto an old path and finding it still exactly where you'd left it, even though the forest around it had grown wild. "5 years," he said, once the server left. "I wasn't sure if I'd ever. I mean, I didn't think that we'd end up on the same terrace in Paris, on Valentine's Day," she supplied, an eyebrow lifting. "Feels like something out of a movie." "Yeah," he said, and not even a subtle one. They shared a quick, breathless laugh. The sound snapped some of the ice. "So," she said, folding her hands on the table, "how's your life?" He blinked. "Starting with the easy questions?" "I see. I figure we don't get to talk about the weather," she replied. "We used up small talk years ago." "Fair." He looked down at his cup, then back at her. "My life is complicated. Busy. Different," he told her, haltingly at first, about the job he'd taken in that far-off city, the one that had broken them, how it had devoured his early years, how he had thrown himself into success as if it could substitute for everything else he had lost. "I moved apartments 3 times, he said. "Each one nicer than the last. Better view, bigger kitchen, more plants I kept killing." She grinned at that. "You and plants were never a good combination." "I tried," he protested. "Apparently, they need consistency." "Who knew?" She tilted her head. "And people," he hesitated. "They got some version of consistency. I dated a lot." "That probably doesn't surprise you." "Not really," she said, and he appreciated that she didn't sound accusatory, just observational. "It was always easy," he continued. "Meeting people. Getting them to like me, at least for a while. But it never stuck. I'd think, okay, maybe this one. Maybe I can do it right this time. Then somewhere along the line I'd start feeling trapped, or bored, or like they were expecting something from me that I didn't know how to give." "What did they expect?" she asked. "Depth," he said, after a moment. "Future tense verbs. I'm good at now. I've always been good at now. Later." He shrugged. "Later is where the work is," she said. "I know." He hesitated, then added, "I'm trying to get better at it. Or at least I'm trying to figure out why it scares me so much." "That's something," she said softly. He glanced at her, surprised by the gentleness in her tone. "What about you?" he asked quickly, before the fragile vulnerability could fracture. "How's your life?" "Maya," she took a breath, feeling the question settle in her bones. "It's quieter than it used to be, she said. In a good way. I moved. I got promoted a couple of times. I started leading a small team. Turns out I'm bossy when I'm being paid for it. He smiled. I always knew you'd end up in charge of something. I write more, she continued. Not as much as I want to, but enough that it feels like part of my life now. Not just a someday thing. And love? He asked, then immediately regretted the bluntness. Sorry. That was... It's fine, she interrupted. I've dated nothing that lasted. Some people were kind. Some were disasters. Most were just wrong. Wrong. How? She looked down at her cup, tracing a finger along the rim. Some only wanted one thing, she said. Others wanted to drown themselves in alcohol or distractions. A few were so afraid of being alone that they tried to fold me into their lives like wallpaper, pretty, quiet, background. His jaw tightened. And you? I'm open to love, she said. I always have been, but I'm not hunting it anymore. I'm not willing to lose myself to get it. Their eyes met. The weight of that statement hanging between them like a shared history turned lesson. I'm sorry, he said suddenly. She blinked. For what? For being the first person you lost yourself for. The candor in his voice startled her more than the words themselves. He looked older as he said it, not in the sense of lines or gray hair, but in the way his regret sat comfortably beside his honesty, no longer something he flinched away from. She stirred her coffee, watching the dark swirl. I wasn't blameless, she said. I stayed when I should have left. I made a religion out of potential. I gave you a lot of sermons to worship, he muttered, a bitter edge under the attempt at humor. I was cruel, Maya. I know that now. Not just in the obvious ways, in the small ones. The jokes that weren't jokes. The ways I made you feel less. She met his gaze, squarely. You did. He swallowed. For a long time, he said quietly. I told myself you were cruel for how you ended it. I made you into the villain because it was easier than seeing myself clearly. But you were right. You did what I should have done before I hurt you that much. It didn't feel brave, she admitted. At the time, it felt like cutting off my own arm. They sat with that for a while. The city murmuring around them, the tower glittering in the distance, like a witness. A couple at the next table erupted into laughter, their joy bright and Maya glanced toward them, then back at Adrian. Do you ever wonder? She asked. What would have happened if things had gone differently, if you hadn't taken that job? Or if I had gone with you anyway? All the time, he said, the answer out before he could edit it. I used to imagine us in that city, fighting, in a smaller apartment. Probably. You hating my late nights? Me resenting how much I missed you when I was at work. It wasn't a pretty picture. She laughed, surprised. You don't imagine the fairy tale? I don't think we were capable of a fairy tale back then, he said. We were too sharp, too unfinished. And now, she asked, and she wasn't sure whether she was asking about the fairy tale or about them. He didn't answer immediately. He glanced out at the tower, at the warm lamp strung along the terrace. When he looked back at her, there was a question in his gaze he didn't quite dare put into words. Now I know what I broke, he said. Back then I only knew how to want things, not how to keep them without crushing them in my hands. Her throat tightened. You didn't break me, she said. I won't give you that much credit. He huffed out a laugh. Fair, but I broke. I know that. I think I finally understand what it cost you to leave. Silence settled again, less brittle than before. Maya watched his face in the candlelight, trying to reconcile the boy she had loved with the man in front of her. There were echoes, of course. The way his mouth tilted when he was trying to be brave. The quick flashes of humor. But there was also a gravity now. A self-awareness that had been entirely absent before. She realized, with a start, that she was no longer afraid of him. Not in the way she had been at 22, when his approval had felt like oxygen and his disapproval like death. The fear that flickered under her ribs now was different. It was the fear of possibilities, of what-ifs resurrected. So, she said, because she needed to break the spell of her own thoughts. How long are you in Paris? Just for the long weekend, he said. Back to work on Tuesday. Same, she replied. Here with friends. Couples? He guessed. Mostly. She smiled wryly. They're off having the official Paris Valentine's experience. I got stood up by my own independence. Same, he said. My friends all set up dates. I decided to take myself out. Self-love is important, she said. Apparently, so is dumb luck, he added. I had no plan to come here. I was just walking. Me too. They let the coincidence settle. Too big to name and too delicate to poke. Her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it. Nina, where are you? We just saw two people literally arguing over a baguette. You would have loved it, Maya typed quickly. Found a view. I'm okay. Have fun. She didn't mention Adrian. Not yet. The thought of trying to explain this impossible convergence of past and present felt like taking a butterfly and pinning it to a board. Friends checking in? He asked. Yeah. She hesitated, then added, I didn't tell them I was meeting my ex on a romantic terrace in Paris. Might ruin their evening. Understandable, he said dryly. He took a sip of his coffee and grimaced. Still awful, he muttered. Still dramatic, she shot back. He laughed, and the sound eased, something tight in her shoulders. They spoke then of lighter things. The cities they had visited, the best meal each had eaten in the last year, the strange ways their bodies had started protesting cheap alcohol, the signs that they were, undeniably, no longer in their early 20s. He told her about learning to cook properly during the pandemic, how his first attempts had been disasters, and how he'd eventually grown proud of a few signature dishes. She told him about the time she'd given a presentation to a room full of executives, and realized halfway through that her blouse was inside out. Did anyone notice? He asked, horrified. Probably, she said. No one said anything. The world is kinder than we think. Sometimes, their words wove a new net between them, made of shared adulthood rather than recycled youth. Every so often, though, their eyes would snag on each other with a gravity that made the air between them feel thinner. The night deepened. The tower's lights sparkled in a rhythmic pattern across the metal lattice, a heartbeat in steel. Eventually, the server came by with the quiet politeness of someone who had seen many lingering conversations and knew when to let them be. He placed the bill discreetly at the edge of the table. I'll get it, Adrian said immediately, reaching for it. You don't have to, Maya replied. I know. He hesitated. Let me. Anyway, for old time's sake, she considered, then nodded. But only if you promise not to call it a date. His smile turned a shade softer. Deal. He paid. They rose from the table almost in unison, chairs scraping lightly against the stone floor. For a moment, they stood side by side at the balustrade, looking out over the city that had, improbably, arranged this meeting. I used to picture this with you, he said quietly, not looking at her. I know, she replied. Me too. He exhaled, a ghost of a laugh. I pictured it when I didn't deserve to, when I was still the guy you left. Maybe you deserved the dream, she said, even if you didn't deserve me then. He glanced at her, eyes bright. And now? He asked, the question barely more than a breath. The hook of it caught in her. She wasn't ready to answer. Not yet. Not after only an evening and a few cups of coffee. Not after the years they had spent building new lives that did not revolve around each other. Now, she said slowly, I think we've both changed too much to pretend we can just pick up where we left off. A flicker of disappointment crossed his face. Then? He nodded. You're right. But, she added, surprising herself, I also think it would be a shame to pretend this didn't happen. To pretend we didn't run into each other on this absurdly perfect terrace, on this absurdly romantic night. That drew a genuine grin from him. It is absurd. So maybe, she finished, we let it be what it is. A beginning of something. I don't know what yet. The hope that flared in his eyes was tempered now. Not the wild, consuming kind she remembered, but something steadier. I can live with that, he said. They left the terrace together, descending the stairs side by side. At the bottom, the city wrapped around them again, in cool air, and the distant murmur of traffic. "Which way's your place?" he asked. She pointed down one street. He pointed down another. "Opposite directions," he said. "Of course!" They stood awkwardly at the corner, the weight of parting pressing in. It felt absurdly like the end of a first date, that liminal moment where everything could tilt either toward more or toward goodbye. He cleared his throat. "Can I message you tomorrow? Just to ask what tourist cliché you checked off your list." "I don't know," she said, and watched his face fall slightly. Then, she sobbed. "But I think if I see a message from you pop up, I won't throw my phone into the Seine." "High praise," he murmured. Relief, flickering. She pulled out her phone, unlocking it. Their old chat still sat there, frozen on the goodbye. She scrolled past it and closed the app. Then, deliberately, she reopened it. "Texts me," she said. "We'll see." His answering smile was small, but real. "Okay." They did not hug. The space between them was still full of fault lines they didn't know how to cross. Instead, they shared one last look, heavy with everything unsaid. "Good night, Maya," he said. "Good night, Adrienne." She turned and walked away, boots clicking against the pavement, each step measured. She did not look back. He watched until she disappeared into the curl of the street, swallowed by light and shadow. Then he exhaled, a long, shaky breath, and headed in the opposite direction, the city stretching out before him like a question. Later, in their separate beds, neither of them slept. Maya lay near the window of the apartment, the Eiffel Tower visible in the distance, its lights winking through a thin curtain. Lila's soft snore came from the other side of the room. The air smelled faintly of someone's perfume, and the sugar of the pastries they'd brought home. She replayed the evening in her mind. The way he had looked when he saw her. That first stunned moment. The way his voice had broken slightly, when he apologized. The way laughter still came so easily between them, like a language they had always shared. Her phone buzzed on the pillow. For a second, she hesitated, then she picked it up. A message from Adrian. "What did you see today?" it read. "Other than the ridiculously coincidental ex-boyfriend on a balcony?" "I mean," she smiled despite herself. After a moment, she typed, "Got lost. Found a terrace. Saw Paris from above. Pretty decent for a first day." 3 blinking dots appeared. "Tomorrow, you should see it from inside a museum," he replied. "That 16-year-old version of you who loved art deserves it." She stared at the words, her chest tightening with an old, familiar tenderness. He still remembered. "You're not wrong," she wrote back. "Louvre." "In the morning, send me a picture of your favorite thing," he answered. "I want to see what you see." She hesitated, thumb poised. "This doesn't mean anything," she told herself. "It's just 2 people who once mattered to each other, sharing a city for a few days." But as she put her phone down and turned toward the window, watching the light play over the tower's iron ribs, she knew that wasn't entirely true. It did mean something. She just didn't know what yet. Across town, Adrian lay in his hotel bed, the glow of his phone the only light in the room. His friends had stumbled in hours earlier, noisy and drunk, then quieted. The hallway had gone still. He scrolled back through their brief conversation, rereading every word as if there were hidden messages tucked between the lines. His chest felt simultaneously too full and hollow. For the first time in years, he wasn't wondering who he might meet tomorrow night, which face in which bar might smile back at him. Instead, he found himself wondering what Maya would think of the winged victory, whether she'd stand in front of it for 10 minutes or an hour, what details she'd notice first. He stared at the last message he had sent. "I want to see what you see." It was, he realized, the most honest sentence he had offered her in a very long time. He set the phone aside, turned toward the window. From his angle, he could just make out the top of the Eiffel Tower, its beacon sweeping slowly across the sky like a lazy, patient eye. "Don't mess this up," he whispered into the dark. He wasn't sure if he was talking to himself, to the universe, or to some version of him that still lurked in the past, waiting to sabotage anything real. The city breathed around them, holding its own secrets. Somewhere between sleeplessness and dawn, Both of them drifted into dreams threaded with pink flowers, golden frames, and a balcony where time, just for an evening, had folded in on itself. In the morning, the Louvre would wait. Messages would be exchanged. Jokes would be made. Old wounds would be pressed, gently, to see if they still hurt. But for now, Paris watched over them. The Eiffel Tower's steady glow, a silent reminder that some promises, no matter how long they've been forgotten, have a way of finding their way back into the light. The next morning, Paris woke up under a sky the color of diluted milk, soft and bright, as if the city had put a gauze curtain between itself and the sun. Maya's alarm vibrated on the nightstand, a gentle buzz that felt almost apologetic. She groped for her phone, squinting at the screen. For a moment, she wasn't sure whether the memories crowding at the edges of her mind belonged to a dream or two last night. The terrace, the flowers, the candlelight. Adrian's face across the table, older and different, and somehow painfully familiar. The way his eyes had softened when he said, "I want to see what you see." Her chest fluttered with a mix of anticipation and dread. Lila groaned from the other bed, burrowing deeper under the duvet. "Turn that thing off. I refuse to be awake before noon in the land of croissants. You promised we'd be at the Louvre early," Maya murmured. "I promised drunk," Lila countered, peeking out from the covers with one mascara-smeared eye. "Drunk, Lila, is a liar. You should know this by now." Nina sat up slowly on the fold-out couch, hair a wild halo, blinking at the light. "Why does my mouth taste like regret and sugar?" "You ordered 3 different desserts," Maya said, and then declared war on a creme brulee. "That tracks." Nina sighed. They exchanged wary smiles, the easy intimacy of friends who had seen one another at their worst and still chosen to share cramped beds and bad coffee. Maya swung her legs out of bed, her body protesting. She felt the weight of the late night, the emotional hangover humming under her skin. The room smelled faintly of perfume and leftover pastries. Someone had left an open box of macarons on the table, the sweets now sticky and sagging. She padded to the window and pushed the curtain aside. Paris stretched before her. Rooftops, like waves of slate, chimneys like punctuation marks. The Eiffel Tower faint in the mist, but unmistakable. Somewhere below, the city was already moving through its Valentine's rituals. Crowded cafes, booked river cruises on the Seine, streets soft-lit for lovers who would wander until their feet ached. Party.Ali. Baba, +1. Her phone buzzed in her hand. A message from Adrian. "Morning," it read. "How's the view?" She stared at the words, pulse quickening. For a few seconds, she did nothing. Then she lifted her phone, pointed it toward the window, and snapped a photo. The tower framed slightly off-center, a slice of rooftop in the foreground, the sky washed with pale gold. She sent it with a simple caption. "Not bad." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again, auditioning for a postcard. "I see," he replied. 16-year-old Maya must be screaming. 16-year-old Maya is trying to play it cool, she wrote back. "But yes, she's screaming." "Good," he answered. "She deserves this." She let herself smile. It felt dangerous and inevitable. Leela watched her from the bed, eyes narrowing. "Who are you texting with that face?" Maya tucked her hair behind her ear. "No one." "Liar," Nina mumbled, already heading toward the tiny kitchen. "Your eyes do that sparkly thing when it's not work? It's just an old friend," Maya said. "Old friend?" Lila repeated, suddenly fully awake. "From here. Did you meet someone last night? Maya, did you have a secret Paris rendezvous while we were drooling on our pillows?" Maya hesitated. The truth sat in her throat like a stone. "Yes," she heard herself say softly. "I ran into Adrian." The name landed like dropped cutlery in the quiet room. Lila sat up straighter. Nina paused with a jar of instant coffee in her hand. "Adrian," Nina echoed slowly. "As in Adrian? Adrian? As in my Adrian," Maya said, then immediately winced. "Well, not my Adrian, just Adrian." Lila stared. "You ran into him here on Valentine's Day?" In Paris, on a terrace. Maya added, because if she was going to tell it, she might as well give it the full absurdity. Nina set the coffee down with deliberate care. Okay. At this point, the universe is just showing off. They bombarded her with questions. Then where? How? What did he look like? Did he apologize? Did she slap him? Did she cry? Maya answered as best she could, weaving around the details that felt too fragile to expose. She told them about the flowers, the Eiffel Tower in the distance, the way he had looked genuinely stunned to see her, the awkward beginning that had softened into hours of talk. Lila's expression shifted from incredulity to a cautious, protective concern. And how do you feel? She asked quietly, when the barrage had dwindled. Maya sat on the edge of the bed, fingers twisting in the hem of her sweater. I don't know, she admitted, shaken. Sad, weirdly. Hopeful. That's the part that scares me. Nina leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Hopeful? For what? For? I don't even know. Maya pressed her palm to her forehead. Not necessarily for us to get back together, just hopeful that maybe it meant something, that all those years weren't just some tragic prelude to nothing. You know, you owe him nothing, Lila said. Settle. You don't have to be his closure or his redemption arc. I know, Maya said, but I also know I'm not the same girl who left him. I can talk to him without falling apart, I think. I hope. Nina poured hot water over the coffee granules, the bitter smell curling through the room. So, what now? He wants me to send him a picture of my favorite piece at the Louvre, Maya said. That's it. Just that? Lila studied her. And you wanna do it? Maya looked out the window again. The tower glowed faintly, steady and indifferent. Yes, she said finally. I think I do. Then do it, Nina said. Just promise us you'll remember you're the main character in your own story, not a supporting role in his. Maya smiled, the metaphor landing in the part of her that still spoke in narratives and scenes. I promise. They drifted into the day with the clumsy grace of people, slightly hungover on both alcohol and emotion. There was coffee that tasted like burned patience, and a cluster of tangled hair ties found under the couch, and the ritual of 3 women trying to share one mirror. By mid-morning, they were on their way to the Louvre, scarves wrapped tight, breath puffing in the cold. The museum rose before them like a stone dream, all glass and arches, and history stacked on history. Inside, the air was warmer, humming with footsteps and whispers in half a dozen languages. They shuffled with the crowds through hallways that smelled faintly of dust and varnish, shoulders brushing other strangers as they moved from room to room. Maya found herself drawn, as she had always known she would be, to the winged victory of Samothrace. The statue stood at the top of a staircase, headless and powerful, marble garments frozen mid-whirl, as if she had just landed from somewhere higher than anyone could see. People thronged around her, cameras held aloft, but somehow she remained untouched by the chaos. Maya stepped closer until she was near enough to see the fine chisel marks in the stone. She felt something in her chest loosen. 16-year-old Maya had seen photos of this statue in books and on websites, had traced the outline of its wings with ink-stained fingers, had whispered someday at the image. Now, someday was here. She lifted her phone. For a moment, she considered putting her own face in the frame, then decided against it. This wasn't about proof of her presence. It was about the thing itself. She took a photo and angled shot that caught the sweep of marble wings, the suggestion of motion, the pale flood of light from the skylight above. Her thumb hovered over the message window to Adrian. What did you see today? He'd asked the night before. She attached the photo and typed, her. He wrote back before she'd even put the phone away. Of course, the message read, you always did love women who refused to be small. She laughed. Lila glanced over her shoulder curiously. Is that him? She whispered. Maya nodded. What did he say? Maya showed her the text. Lila raised an eyebrow. Okay, that's actually a good line. Don't encourage him, Maya muttered. But her cheeks were warm. They moved on through the museum, past paintings and sculptures and rooms where entire ceilings seemed to float on clouds of gold. She took pictures of things that snagged her heart, A little girl in a portrait holding a worn stuffed animal, a stormy seascape that looked like the ocean in a nightmare, a tiny, meticulous sketch tucked in a corner that most people walked past without noticing. Every so often, she sent one to Adrian with a brief caption. "Found your twin?" she wrote under a painting of a mythological trickster with a sly smile. He answered, "Rude, but fair? Too many people around Mona Lisa," she complained in another. "She looks like she's hosting a press conference. Leave her alone." "She's had a long week," he replied. Their banter threaded itself through the day like a quiet, private channel, separate from the loud group chat, where her friends posted photos of pastries and bridges and bad attempts at French. At lunch, sitting in a cafe near the museum, she watched Lila stir sugar into her espresso. "He's being different," she admitted. "Les performative. More present. People can change," Nina said, tearing off a piece of baguette. "Doesn't mean you owe them a rehearsal of the past." "I know," Maya said. "I'm just surprised by how easy it is to talk to him. How not angry I feel." "Anger was never your problem," Lila said. "Forgiveness was. Maybe I'm not forgiving him," Maya mused. "Maybe I'm forgiving myself for wanting to." That silenced them for a moment. Outside, the afternoon slipped by in a haze of low clouds and filtered light. They walked along the river, watching boats glide past, their wakes etching temporary scars on the water's skin. Street vendors sold prints of famous paintings and caricatures that exaggerated noses and chins. Somewhere, an accordion played. So on the nose, it made them all laugh. Maya felt strangely light, as if the city itself had soaked up some of the heaviness she'd carried. The texts from Adrian came less frequently as the day went on, not because he'd lost interest, but because both of them were busy actually living their days. He sent a photo of a narrow street lined with bookshops, the kind of place she would have gravitated to immediately. "Thought of you," he wrote. "Didn't go in. Felt like trespassing on one of your fantasies without permission." She answered with a shot of a street artist sketching a couple under an umbrella. "That's cute," she typed. "You learning boundaries? At last, you'd be proud of my emotional growth," he replied. "I almost bought you a book you never asked for." She rolled her eyes and grinned. That night, her friends returned to the apartment, flushed with wine and stories. One of the couples had gotten into a minor argument on a boat and made up under a bridge. Another had discovered a jazz bar so perfect it felt like a movie set. Maya curled up on the couch with a blanket, letting their noise wash over her. When her phone buzzed again, she glanced at the screen. "Are you free tomorrow afternoon?" Adrian had written. "No pressure. Just, there's a place by the river I found. Thought you might like it." Her heart thudded. She typed, deleted, typed again. "I have plans with my friends," she wrote. "Of course," he responded almost immediately. "Another time." She stared at that, at his quick acceptance, at the absence of the old wheedling, the subtle guilt tripping. After a minute, she added, "But I might be done by 6. There was a pause. Then, "I'll send you the location. If you feel like it, come. If not, no hard feelings." "Really?" He attached a pin on the map a spot along the Seine, not far from Notre Dame, on a quieter quay. Her friends were watching her. "You're going," Nina said flatly. "I might," Maya hedged. "You're going," Lila repeated. "But you're going on your terms. You can leave whenever you want. We'll be one panic text away." Maya laughed, relief bubbling through the anxiety. "You two are terrifying, and I love you." "Good," Nina said. Healthy fear keeps men in line. The next day unfolded like a montage. Markets with piles of citrus so bright they looked fake. A small church. Lila insisted on entering just to light a candle and thank whoever's in charge for inventing carbs. A bookstore, where Maya lost track of time in the English language section, until Nina dragged her out. By late afternoon, they ended up on the Isle de la Cite, watching the scaffolding that still clung to the wounded skeleton of Notre Dame. Tourists snapped photos, locals huddled in coats, glancing up with a mixture of nostalgia and resignation. Maya checked the time, las 5:42. Her heart picked up. "I'm going to take a walk," she said carefully. "We're not made of glass," Lila replied, hugging her tightly. Go. We'll meet you back at the apartment later. If you're not home by midnight, we assume you eloped, and we'll demand tasteful souvenirs. Nina kissed her cheek. Text us, if you need an extraction. We can show up pretending to be your furious wives. Please don't, Maya laughed, but the image eased some of her tension. She followed the map on her phone, descending a set of quiet stone steps toward the river. The sounds of the city softened behind her, replaced by the low rush of water and the distant call of a boat horn. The quay was mostly empty, save for a few couples sitting on the edge with their legs dangling over the Seine, and a man walking a dog that looked like a small cloud. Adrian stood near the end of the path, hands in his pockets, back to her. He wore a dark coat, and a scarf looped loosely around his neck. His posture was relaxed, head tilted as he watched the current. Beside him, perched on the low wall, were 2 paper cups with lids, and what looked like a small paper bag. For a moment, Maya considered turning around and walking back up the steps. He hadn't seen her yet. She could make a quiet escape and send an apologetic message later, blaming the cold or fatigue. But then he turned, as if some thread between them had tugged. Their eyes met across the stretch of stone and water-scented air. He smiled, not the full wattage grin he used on the world, but something smaller, tentative, threaded with disbelief that she was actually there. You came, he said. So did you, she replied. Because the alternative you asked felt too vulnerable. He gestured to the cups. I brought coffee. Don't worry, I remembered you like to torture yourself with the bitter stuff, but also pretend you don't. So one is black, one has enough milk and sugar to qualify as dessert. You can pick your poison. She walked toward him, the rhythm of her steps loud in her ears. As she reached his side, she caught the scent of him, Fein Tokoro Nuuda, something warm she associated with years ago and had tried hard to forget. High stakes, she said lightly, eyeing the cups. If I choose wrong, I might ruin the entire timeline. He laughed. Always so dramatic. Look who's talking, she shot back. She chose the cup with the red marker scrawl M on the lid. It turned out to be the one with milk and just a hint of sweetness. She took a sip, the warmth spreading through her chest. Good? He asked. Suspiciously so, she replied. He leaned back against the low wall, close but not touching her. The river flowed past, green-gray and insistent. Above, the sky had shifted toward evening, the first hints of pink appearing at the horizon. I used to come down to a river near my apartment after work, he said, eyes on the water. Needed to get out of the glass and steel box before my brain fried. This felt similar. Maya watched his profile, the way the fading light brushed his cheekbones, the faint stubble along his jaw. And you thought? This is where I will lure my unsuspecting ex for a second meeting, she teased. He winced, theatrically. Lure is a strong word, I thought. This is a place where 2 people can sit and not have to shout over a DJ or a cheesy violin. That's fair, she acknowledged. They fell into an easy quiet, the kind that would have terrified them in their 20s. Back then, silence had meant something was wrong, that one of them was pulling away. Now, it felt more like a pause where their thoughts could catch up. So, he said after a while, tell me about the museum. Besides bullying the Mona Lisa, she exhaled, grateful for the simple question. She told him about the winged victory, about the paintings that had surprised her, about the way certain sculptures looked softer in real life than in photos. He listened with an attentiveness that made her slightly self-conscious. He asked small, sincere questions. Which room was her favorite? Did the crowds bother her? Did she sketch anything? I wanted to, but it was too packed, she admitted. I took notes instead. Phrases. Colors? Little things. Of course you did, he said, still writing everything down. Still pretending you don't, she countered. I see the way you look at things. You store them. You just don't bother recording them. He considered that maybe I was afraid that if I wrote them down, they'd become real. Harder to ignore. Look at you, she said softly. Therapist. Much, he flushed. Actually. Yeah, she turned to him, surprised. You're in therapy? He nodded, eyes on his shoes. Started a couple of years ago. Work offered some sessions for stress. I kept going. Maya blinked. Ew. Well, okay. That's not the answer I expected. Me neither, he admitted. First time I went in, I thought, I'll talk about my annoying boss and be done. Then this woman with terrifyingly kind eyes asked me one question about my childhood, and suddenly I was crying about how no one ever told me no in a way that stuck. She laughed, startled. Sounds about right. Turns out, he continued wryly, if you live your whole life thinking you're the exception to every rule, you become a nightmare partner. You were challenging, she said diplomatically. That's a generous word for it, he replied. He took a breath, voice dropping lower. I told her about you, about how you left, about how I convinced myself for years that you were cold for cutting contacts so completely. And what did she say? Maya asked. That it sounded like you finally set a boundary I'd been trampling for a long time, he said. That you chose yourself. And that maybe the reason it hurt so much was because deep down, I knew you were right to do it. Maya's eyes stung unexpectedly. I didn't do it to punish you, she said. I did it because I knew if I left the door open even a crack, I'd crawl back through it the first time you said my name. I know that now, he said quietly. Back then, I just couldn't see past my own hurt. He turned to face her fully, resting his coffee cup on the wall. I told myself I loved you, he said. And I did, in the only way I knew how, at the time hungry and consuming and terrified. But I also needed you to be smaller than me, to orbit me, to prove that I was as important as I believed I should be. Maya swallowed, the words heavy and precise, like stones being set into their proper place. You were important, she said. You just didn't trust that enough to stop testing it. He winced. You always did have a talent for summing up my worst qualities in one sentence. Occupational hazard, she replied. Writer brain. He smiled, then sobered. I'm not telling you this so you'll
absolve me, he said.
I know an apology 5 years late doesn't erase what I did. I want you to know that I see it now. All of it. Not through the lens of poor me, got dumped by the love of my life, but as the culmination of 1,000 choices I kept making wrong. The phrase love of my life lodged in her chest, sharp and sweet. Why now? She asked. Why not? I don't know. 3 years ago. Or never, he chuckled, a little helplessly. Because I wasn't ready 3 years ago. I was still defending myself to myself, saying, yeah, I messed up, but she overreacted. It took me a long time to realize that just because pain is familiar, doesn't mean it's acceptable. He flicked a pebble into the river. It disappeared without a trace. And never, he shrugged. I was prepared for that. I really was. I thought I'd spend the rest of my life occasionally, wondering how you were, but never knowing. Then Paris decided to play matchmaker, and here we are. Fate, she said, half joking, half not. Or just a city big enough for millions of coincidences, he countered. But this one feels personal. She stared at him, at the earnestness in his eyes. This was not the boy who had deflected every serious conversation with a joke. This was a man who had, at some point, sat alone in a therapist's office and let his own defenses fall. I don't know what you want from me, Adrian, she said, voice low, and I don't know what I can give. He nodded, gaze steady. That's fair. I don't have a plan. For once, I'm not standing here with a speech rehearsed in my head about second chances and destiny. I just wanted to be honest, to let you see who I am now. If you wanted to. And if I don't, she asked. Then we finish our coffee, he said. We talk about the city. We say goodbye like two people who once mattered, and now are strangers with shared memories. I'll be sad, but I'll survive. And I won't chase you. The simplicity of that made her throat ache. She thought of the younger version of herself, who would have leapt at the chance to rewrite their story, who would have clung to him just because he was willing to say he'd been wrong. She thought of the years she had spent learning to occupy her own life fully, without waiting for his text or his approval. I don't know if I can ever go back, she said. I don't want you to, he replied. Back wasn't good for you. She looked at him sharply. He held her gaze. I'd like to know who you are now, he added, more softly. Not as a way to earn back what we had, but because you were always the most interesting person I knew, and I feel like I barely scratched the surface back then. Too busy admiring my own reflection in your eyes. A laugh bubbled from her. Unexpected and watery. That's the most Adrian sentence you've ever said. Baby steps. He grinned. They spent the rest of the afternoon there, talking. They spoke of small things at first. Favorite foods, music they'd discovered, shows they'd watched. She told him about a poetry reading she'd been to where the microphone had broken halfway through, and the poet had simply raised her voice. Her words somehow heavier, without amplification. He told her about a solo trip he'd taken through several countries, how he'd felt both free and Then the conversation deepened, almost without them noticing. She told him about panic attacks she'd had in the first year, after leaving him, how she'd woken, sometimes convinced she'd made the worst mistake of her life, only to calm herself down with lists of all the small cruelties she would no longer have to endure. He listened, without flinching. He told her about waking up one night in his high-rise apartment, heart racing, the city glittering outside, realizing that he had built a life impressive enough for social media, but barren of true intimacy. She listened, without gloating. The sky faded to violet, then to blue-black. Street lamps blinked on along the embankment, their reflections shivering on the water. They laughed, too genuinely, helplessly, at old memories that had lost their sting, at the way they had once thought they knew everything, at the absurdity of being two grown adults, dissecting their early 20s, in the middle of Paris, as if it were a group therapy session, sponsored by the tourism board. At one point, a tourist boat passed close by, its lights bright, its deck crowded with people taking photos. A few waved. Without thinking, Maya and Adrian both waved back. We look like a divorced couple reuniting for the sake of our imaginary children, he said. Speak for yourself, she retorted. I'd have full custody. You'd get them on alternate weekends, and supervised Thursdays. He clutched his chest. Savage. She smiled into her cup. Eventually, the cold began to seep through their coats. Maya's fingers were numb. Adrian's nose was pink. We should head back, she said reluctantly. My friends will mock me if I show up with hypothermia and no dramatic story to justify it. He chuckled. We could always lie. Tell them we fought a swan for dominance of the river. Knowing my friends, they'd believe it, she said. They walked together, toward the stairs, their steps echoing softly. At the top, the city reasserted itself. Honking cars, laughing groups, the smell of roasted chestnuts and exhaust. They paused on the sidewalk. Which way? He asked. She pointed. He pointed in the opposite direction again. They exchanged a rueful smile. Of course, she murmured. He shifted his weight, suddenly awkward. Can I? He trailed off, then tried again. Would it be okay if I messaged you tomorrow? Just to ask what you and your terrifyingly protective friends destroyed in the name of tourism. She hesitated. This was the tightrope she found herself on, between the safety of distance and the pull of something familiar and frighteningly warm. Between the woman who had left him to save herself, and the woman who now stood in front of him, more whole, less willing to disappear. Yes, she said finally. You can. He exhaled, relief obvious. Okay. They looked at each other for a long second. The air between them felt charged, crowded with the ghost of 1,000 kisses that belonged to another lifetime. He lifted a hand, as if to touch her arm, then seemed to think better of it and let it fall. Good night, Maya, he said. Good night, she replied. He turned and walked away, hands back in his pockets. She watched until he reached the corner and disappeared into the flow of people. Only then did she let herself sag against the wall, heart hammering. Hafom Bazato. Nina, you alive are currently starring in your own telenovela? Maya typed with shaking fingers. Both, I think. She headed back toward the apartment, her steps light and heavy at once. Over the next few days, a rhythm emerged. They did not see each other every day. Paris was big, and they both had friends and plans, and the vague guilt of tourists who knew they had limited time and too many things to see. But every night, without fail, a message appeared. Sometimes it was simple. What did you see today? He'd ask. She would answer, Montmartre. 2. Cute. Artists. Overrated macarons. 7/10. would climb again. His response: "Glad to know you're still judging pastries on a strict rubric." Another day, he wrote, visited a cemetery. "Don't ask." It was weirdly peaceful, she answered. "Leave it to you to turn Paris into a gothic field trip." Other times, the messages were longer. Stories unfolded in paragraphs. A stranger's kindness on the metro. A busker whose song had made her cry. A moment when he'd nearly gotten into a fight with a taxi driver, and then diffused it with a joke. They didn't talk about the past in those messages. Not directly. It hung between the lines. A shadow they both acknowledged by carefully avoiding its driest parts. Her friends watched her with a mix of amusement and concern. "He texts you good night," Lila observed one evening, leaning against the bathroom doorframe while Maya brushed her teeth. "Every single night." "That's not nothing. He texts me." "Sleep well. Try not to adopt any pigeons," Maya corrected around a mouthful of foam. "Romantic." "I know. Point is, he's consistent," Lila insisted. "That's new." Maya spat, rinsed, met her friend's eyes in the mirror. "I know. That's what scares me. Being treated well," Nina called from the living room. "Truly terrifying phenomenon." Maya laughed, but her expression in the mirror was complicated. On the third night, after a long day of museums and markets, she found herself sitting alone on the balcony of their apartment, wrapped in a blanket, the city buzzing faintly below. Her phone lit up. "Can I ask you something?" Adrian wrote. She stared at the words, feeling the shift. "This was not about pastries or bus." "Depends," she replied, "on how invasive it is, and whether it involves my browser history." He didn't answer immediately. When the dots finally appeared, they lingered for a long time. "Why didn't you answer any of my messages back then?" he asked. "After you ended it." "Not even once." "I know you asked for no contact, and I pushed, and that was wrong, but was there ever a moment when you wanted to?" Her breath caught. She stared at the screen, past and present colliding. "Yeah," she typed slowly. "About 1,000 moments." The typing indicator flashed. "What stopped you?" he asked. She could have left it there, could have ignored the question, or deflected with a joke. Instead, she let her thumbs move, honesty spilling like ink. "Fear," she wrote. "If I opened that door even a crack, I knew I'd let you back in, and I knew I wasn't strong enough yet to ask for the kind of love I needed. I'd have taken whatever you offered and called it enough." The 3 dots appeared, vanished, came back. "Thank you," he finally wrote, "for being stronger than me. That even if I hated you for it." She blinked hard, the city lights blurring. "Did you keep the postcard?" he asked, in another message, as if sensing she needed a gentler turn. "I did," she answered. "It's in a box with some old notebooks. Corners bent. Colors fading. But it's there." His reply came quickly. "Seems it did its job. It got you here." "Got us here," she corrected before she could stop herself. She sat with that pronoun, its quiet weight. On the 5th day, the group decided to split up. The couples went to Versailles. Lila and Nina booked a cooking class that promised to teach them how to make croissants, and, in fine print, how to accept that theirs would never be as good as the bakery. Maya, unexpectedly, had the day to herself. She texted Adrian without overthinking for once. "I have 0 plans. Convince me not to just sit in a cafe all day and judge people's outfits." His answer came within a minute. "What if we sit in a cafe all day and judge people's outfits together?" She bit her lip. "Is that a good idea?" She wrote. "Probably not," he replied. "But it sounds like a nice one." The honesty disarmed her. "Send me the address," she answered. He chose a place tucked away on a side street, all wooden beams and fogged windows. Inside, the air smelled of butter and coffee, and the sound of plates and low voices created a cocoon of anonymity. He was already there when she arrived, sitting at a table by the window, sunlight cutting a bright stripe across his cheek. He looked up as the bell chimed, and the expression on his face relief, pleasure, a hint of nerves hit her like a soft, unexpected blow. "You're punctual," he said, standing. "I'm European now," she replied. "I take time seriously." They ordered pastries and coffee. He tried, valiantly, To pronounce the names, in French, the server smiled kindly and repeated them correctly, scribbling them down without judgment. They talked for hours. Stories spilled out in no particular order. Her disastrous attempt at online dating where a man had brought his mother to the first meetup, his brief stint in a band that had never made it past 3 rehearsals, and a very bad logo. She showed him a few poems on her phone, fingers hovering as she considered, and then dismissed the urge to edit them on the spot. He scrolled through photos of his grandma's old house in the countryside, now cared for by an aunt. The kitchen still exactly as he remembered. "You should visit," he said, almost absently. "The fields are always full of wildflowers in summer. The air smells different there." Kuayeta. Da? Her heart stumbled. "We used to talk about going there," she reminded him. "I know," he said. "Back then, I pictured us running around like idiots, taking pictures for social media, me trying to convince you to climb hay bales in a dress. And now?" she asked. "Now I picture us." He hesitated. "I don't know. Just being there, not needing to prove to anyone that we are." Silence wrapped around them for a moment, soft as wool. "This is dangerous," she said quietly. He met her gaze. "I know. I don't want to rewrite history," she continued, "or pretend those years didn't happen. I don't want to fall back into something that hurt me." "I don't want that either," he said. "If we were to try anything again, it would have to be new, built differently, or not at all. I promise I'm not here to drag you back into the old story." "Then, what are you here for?" she asked, the question trembling between them. He looked down at his hands, turning his coffee cup slowly. "I'm here because seeing you made me realize how much of my life I've spent being half present in everything," he said. "Work, friendships, relationships, always with one foot out the door, one eye on the nearest exit. With you, I feel aware of every word I say, of every second. It's terrifying, and it's the only thing that's felt real in a long time." Her eyes burned. "Adrian?" He shook his head, cutting off whatever softness she might have wrapped his name in. "I'm not asking for an answer," he said. "Not now. Maybe not ever. I just needed to say it out loud. For me." She leaned back, studying him. "I believe you," she said. The simple statement seemed to startle him. "You do?" "Yes." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's the most dangerous part." They left the cafe in the late afternoon, bell chiming overhead, the streets bathed in a gentle golden light. The air had warmed slightly. People walked slower, as if reluctant to surrender the day. He walked her back, toward her neighborhood, hands tucked into his coat pockets, voice softer than usual. At a corner, they paused to let a group of tourists pass. A street musician nearby played a slow, aching song on a violin. The melody threaded through the traffic noise, fragile and persistent. Maya closed her eyes for a second, letting it wash over her. When she opened them, Adrian was watching her, expression unreadable. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "Just, I'd forgotten how you do that." "Do what?" "Let the world touch you," he answered. "Most people flinch. You absorb." She licked her lips, suddenly nervous. "That's a dangerous compliment." "Maybe," he said, "but it's true." They reached the building where she was staying. She stopped at the door, turning to face him. "My friends are probably listening at the window," she said, "prepared to judge your every move." He smirked, but there was a hint of apprehension. "Should I wave? Strike e contolaito pose?" "Just be yourself," she said. "Whoever that is now." "That's the plan," he replied. They stood there for a moment, the narrow street around them echoing with distant footsteps and the clink of dishes from open windows. "I leave in 2 days," he said quietly. "I know," she replied. "We head out the same day. Different flights, I think." "Probably," he murmured. "The world's not that small." "Isn't it?" she asked, thinking of the terrace, the river, this doorway. He smiled, a little sadly. "Apparently not." "Will you be okay?" she asked, surprising herself with the question. He looked at her as if she'd asked whether the earth would keep spinning. "I'll be changed," he said. Whatever happens. That's already true, she swallowed. I don't know what I want yet, she admitted, about any of this. I don't want to make promises in a city that feels like a movie set. I need to know what it feels like to want you if I do in the boring, everyday light of my real life. His throat worked. That's more than fair, but I also don't want to pretend this week didn't matter, she added. Because it did. It does? He let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. You realize you're contradicting every love story that uses Paris as a backdrop, right? Good, she said softly. There, too neat. He nodded. Then, can we just agree that we're two complicated people who shared a balcony, a riverbank, and too much coffee, and that whatever comes next, we'll try to be honest? Yes, she said. I can agree to that. He glanced toward the upstairs window, where a shadow shifted behind the curtain. Tell your friends I was charming and remorseful, he whispered, and that my hair looked amazing, she snorted. Don't push it. He took a step back, then another, lifting a hand. Good night, Maya, he said. Good night, she replied. He turned and walked away. This time, she did look back. Halfway down the block, he paused, as if feeling her gaze, and looked over his shoulder. Their eyes met one last time in the fading light. He smiled, not wide, not dazzling, just real. She carried that smile with her up the stairs, through the gauntlet of her friends' questions, into the quiet of night. Later, lying in bed, she scrolled through their messages. There were more than she'd realized, stacking up like small stones, each one a step away from the person he had been, and toward the person he was trying to become. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, then moved. Tomorrow's our last full day, she wrote. Don't waste it being an introspective in your hotel room. What do you suggest? He asked. She stared at the blinking cursor, at the tower glowing in the distance, at the future she hadn't yet dared to picture. Let's meet, she typed. No terraces, no river, just walk. See what's left of us when we're not sheltered by postcard views. Her heart pounded as she hit send. The answer came quickly. Deal, he wrote. I'll bring comfortable shoes and lower expectations. She laughed into the dark, the sound surprised and a little wild. Tomorrow, they would walk through ordinary streets and talk about extraordinary things. The possibility of second chances, the limits of growth, the ways love can be both poison and cure. Tomorrow, they would find out whether the version of them that existed outside Parisian clichés had any space left in the real world. Tonight, they dreamed not of the love that had been stained and sharp, but of the love that might be slower, kinder, built not on the desperate need to be everything to each other, but on the quiet, radical idea of simply being enough. Paris, still swollen with couples chasing last-minute Valentine's magic along the Seine, moved at a slower, satisfied pace the next morning. Party. Alibaba. +1. Maya woke to the sound of rain. Not a downpour, just a fine, steady curtain, tapping against the balcony doors, soft enough to feel private, like a secret shared between the city and anyone awake early enough to notice. She lay still for a moment, listening to it, the way the drops changed pitch when they hit glass, metal, stone. In the other bed, Lila snored very gently. On the fold-out, Nina muttered something unintelligible in her sleep and rolled over, cocooning herself deeper into the blanket fortress she'd built the night before. Maya turned her head toward the window. The Eiffel Tower was half veiled by mist, its top disappearing into a low cloud. The rooftops glistened. A lone pigeon hunched on a chimney, looking personally offended by the weather. Street sounds floated up, faint car tires hissing on wet pavement, an occasional shout, the distant, bright peal of a bicycle bell. Her phone lay face down on the nightstand. The awareness of it pulsed at the edge of her consciousness, like a heartbeat in another room. She reached for it before she could talk herself out of it. One new message. Still on for the walk? Adrian had written late the night before. Rain or shine. I promise not to complain about my hair frizzing much. She smiled despite the heaviness in her chest. A second message, sent 15 minutes later. Okay, I lied. I will absolutely complain about my hair, but I'll bring an umbrella. And pastries, as a peace offering? Maya stared at the screen, thumb hovering. This was their last full day in Paris. Tomorrow, they'd both be swallowed by airports and security lines and recycled cabin air. Tomorrow, life would start moving again in its usual rhythm. One beat for her, one beat for him. No overlap. Today was a narrow bridge between worlds. She typed. He raced. Typed again. Rain's not that bad, she finally wrote. I'll bring a scarf. You bring the pastries. We'll survive. Deal. His reply came almost instantly. Meet you at 11. Outside the bookshop, near the river. The one with the crooked sign. She could picture it. They'd passed it 2 days before. Its doorway crowded with postcards and old paperbacks. Works, she answered. Don't be late. Terrifying, he texted back. I forgot how you weaponize punctuality. She set the phone down. Exhaling slowly, Lila's sleepy voice drifted across the room. You're smiling at the void again. Maya jumped. I thought you were asleep. I was, Lila said, peeling one eye open. Then my gossip senses started tingling. Nina groaned from the couch. If you two start whispering, at least put the kettle on. I require caffeine to handle emotional arcs. Maya shuffled toward the tiny kitchen, wrapping a sweater around herself, the floor cold under her bare feet. The kettle hissed to life. MUGS clinked. Steam fogged the little window above the sink. So, Nina said, sitting up and rubbing her face. Last day in Paris? What are we doing? Fearless leader. You too, Maya said, pointing with a spoon. Are going to that vintage market you were drooling over yesterday? And then, probably to a bakery. And then probably to emotional ruin when it's time to leave. And... You? Lila asked, though her tone said she already knew. I'm meeting Adrian, Maya replied. For a walk in the rain. Nina squinted. So... It's an indie film now. It's just a walk, Maya insisted. New terrace. No dramatic view. Just people. The city doing groceries and laundry. Lila accepted her mug of coffee and cradled it in both hands. And what are you hoping to find on this very mundane, romantic? No stakes at all. Walk? I don't know, Maya said honestly. Maybe nothing. Maybe clarity? Clarity is overrated, Nina muttered. But we support you. Lila's gaze softened. Just remember you don't have to decide your whole life in one day. You're allowed to let things be unfinished for a while. I'm tired of unfinished, Maya admitted quietly. Then maybe today isn't about finishing, Lila countered. Maybe it's about restarting. Or deciding there's no restart. Either way, you're the one holding the pen. Maya nodded, the metaphor settling somewhere deep. By 11, the rain had thinned to a faint drizzle that brushed her face like damp breath. She wrapped a scarf around her neck, pulled her coat tighter, and descended the familiar 5 flights of stairs. The city smelled freshly washed. Stone and wet leaves, and a faint thread of coffee from every direction. The bookshop appeared at the bend of the street, like something out of a painting, its crooked wooden sign creaking gently in the breeze, its doorway overflowing with mismatched shelves and baskets of yellowed paperbacks. Adrian stood under the overhang, hands in his pockets, hair indeed slightly frizzy at the edges. A white paper bag peeked from under his arm. An umbrella leaned against the wall beside him, closed for the moment. Maya saw him before he saw her. For a second, she let herself simply look. He seemed less like a memory now, and more like a person anchored firmly in the present. The once boyish angles of his face had settled into something sharper, more defined. There were faint lines between his brows that suggested thinking, frowning, worrying. The easy arrogance he'd once worn like cologne had softened into something quieter. She stepped forward. Hey, she called. He turned, and his expression broke open. Hey, he echoed. You're on time. I'm intimidated. You had pastries as motivation, she said. I trusted your stomach. He lifted the bag in mock offense. I'll have you know these are for you. Mostly, depending on your answers to my extremely invasive questions. She raised an eyebrow. We'll see about that. They set off without much discussion, falling into step as the umbrella remained unused at his side. The rain was light enough to ignore, the kind that clung to eyelashes and made the world look slightly blurred around the edges. "So?" he said, after they'd walked a block in companionable silence. "Ordinary day. No postcard views. Where do you want to go?" "Nowhere in particular," she replied. "Everywhere. Maybe. I want to see the parts of the city that don't make it onto magnets, alleyways and laundromats." "Got it," he said. "I excel at mediocre glamour." They wandered through side streets where cafes were filled, not with tourists, but with people hunched over laptops, where children in bright raincoats splashed in puddles while their parents scrolled on their phones, where elderly women in sturdy shoes carried bags of groceries as if the rain had been doing this every day of their lives. To be fair, it probably had. They shared the pastries halfway through their walk, sitting on a low stone wall, outside a church, whose doors were locked, its bells silent. "What did you get?" Maya asked, peering into the bag. "A selection," he said, because I panic ordered when the woman behind me in line sighed loudly. There were 2 Pano chocolate, a raspberry tart, and something that looked like an experiment involving almonds and too much butter. "Dividing this equally is going to require diplomacy," Maya said. "Good thing we're both older and wiser now," he replied. In the end, they shared everything, passing pieces back and forth, fingers brushing occasionally, each touch a small electric reminder of skin that had once been mapped and memorized. "So," Adrian said around a mouthful of chocolate, "I have a confession. Bet you still chew like a teenager," she suggested. He swallowed, smirked. "Also, that. But no, I realized this morning that I'm weirdly calm." She looked at him, surprised. "Calm? Yeah?" He gestured vaguely, as if trying to sketch the feeling in the air. "The first couple of days, seeing you again, Tokinai was off balance. Like I'd been dropped into someone else's story. But today feels normal. Not in a dismissive way, just grounded."
She considered that.
"Maybe we finally burned through the backlog of unsaid things." "Don't jinx it," he said. "I'm sure there's plenty more lurking." "Probably," she admitted. "But I'm glad you feel okay." He gave her a sidelong glance. "And you? Ask me again in a few hours," she said. They walked again, past a narrow alley, strung with laundry, past a tiny bar where an older man sat alone at the counter at noon, past a florist sweeping petals out onto the wet sidewalk, at a crosswalk. As they waited for the light to change, Adrian said, "I keep thinking about that first day, at the cafe. My phone, dying." "Best battery failure of your life," she said. "Objectively, yes," he replied. "And I keep thinking about how much I didn't know. Not about you, but about myself. About what I was capable of, both good and bad." She folded her arms, more against the cold seeping into her sleeves than in defensiveness. "You were very sure of who you were," she said. "Which is to say, you were wrong in really specific ways." He laughed once, softly. "Accureto." They drifted across the street with the flow of pedestrians. "I thought love meant intensity," he continued. "Big gestures, dramatic fights, jealousy, as proof of passion. If things were calm, I worried it meant I was bored. And if things were calm," she said, "I relaxed for the first time in my life." "Exactly," he said quietly. "We were reading from different manuals." "Not just reading," she replied. "We were written by different authors." He glanced at her. "Maybe we're co-writing now." She felt the line land somewhere dangerously warm. "Careful," she warned. "You're talking to a woman who actually thinks about chapter structure." "Terrifying," he murmured. They reached a small square, with a carousel standing silent in the drizzle, its painted horses glistening, its lights off. A handful of kids ran circles around it, inventing their own games. A dog trotted by with a stick twice its length clamped in its jaws, tail high. Maya stopped, watching. "I love this," she said. "What?" "Damp horses," he teased. "The in-between," she replied. "This is supposed to be some charming, twinkling thing at night. But now, it's just there, waiting, still beautiful, but not performing." He followed her gaze. Is that what you want? He asked. A love that's beautiful, when it's not performing. She almost said yes automatically. But the question sank deeper. Yes, she said slowly, and I want quiet, not the absence of feeling, the absence of dread. His face flickered. Guilt and understanding tangling. I gave you a lot of dread, he said. You did, she agreed, and I carried it like it was my job. You deserved better, he said. Yes, she replied, meeting his eyes. I did. The words didn't feel like a weapon anymore, or a plea, just a fact. He nodded, taking the blow not as punishment, but as payment on an old debt. They kept walking. As the afternoon stretched, the rain eased, clouds thinned. A shy patch of blue appeared above the rooftops. They circled back toward the river, without quite meaning to, drawn by the wide space and the steady, reflective motion of water. Couples lounged on benches, sharing headphones. A boy skipped stones, each one making brief, perfect arcs before disappearing. At one point, they paused on a bridge. Maya leaned on the rail, watching the current slide under them. I used to imagine throwing my phone in there, she said suddenly. He blinked.
When?
Back then, she replied, when things were bad. When your name on the screen felt like a test. I was always failing. I thought if I just got rid of the device, I could get rid of the version of myself that waited for it to light up. He was quiet for a long moment. I did the same, he said at last. Different river. Same urge. She turned, startled. You. After you ended it, he said, I'd sit by the water in that city and think, if I just hurl this stupid thing away, maybe I'll stop staring at a screen that isn't changing. But then I'd think, what if she writes? What if she changes her mind? And I'd put it back in my pocket and hate myself a little more. She looked at him. Really? Looked. I'm sorry, she said. He shook his head. No. Don't do that. You don't have to be sorry for the consequences of my choices. I want you to know, it wasn't easy for me, either. That I didn't just bounce. I know that now, she said. Maybe I always did. Underneath the anger, he smiled faintly. Your anger was very justified. It kept me alive, she said lightly. Anger is good for the first draft. Not great for the epilogue, he laughed. They walked until their feet ached. Until their conversation had looped through childhood memories, weird coworkers, books they'd loved, the sudden terror of realizing that at their age some people were already calling themselves tired with a seriousness that suggested they couldn't imagine changing anything. By the time they decided to head back, the city had shifted again. The sky was clearing, streaked with pale gold. The smell of rain was giving way to the smell of food, garlic, butter, something sweet caramelizing in ovens all over Paris. Outside Maya's building, they stopped. It no longer felt like a movie scene, standing there. It felt like the end of a long, complicated conversation on a day that had refused to be spectacular and turned out, somehow, to be exactly what they needed. So, Adrian said, rocking back on his heels. Last night, in the city of clichés. Any grand plans? She thought of the couples upstairs, planning dinners, and last photos. I think my friends want to go somewhere with tiny portions and expensive wine, she said. Then come home and eat chips in their underwear. True luxury, he said. I'm meeting my guys for a final. We're totally going to keep this work-life balance toast. Then, I'll probably pack badly and panic in the morning. She smiled, then sobered. Adrian. He stilled at the sound of his name in that tone. I meant what I said, she continued, about needing to know what this feels like at home. Not here. I don't want to make promises I can't keep. Or let you make promises you can't, he swallowed. I understand. But, she added, I also don't want to pretend this week was just nostalgia. It wasn't. You're not who you were, and neither am I. That matters. His shoulders eased slightly. It matters to me too. She hesitated, wrestling with something inside her. I'm willing to keep talking, she said. After we go back. Calls? Not just texts. Real conversations. See if we can build something. Even if it ends up being just a friendship that doesn't hurt. His eyes brightened. hope flickering like a candle that had been shielded from the wind. "I'd like that," he said quietly. "A lot." "Okay," she murmured. They stood there in the soft light, traffic brushing past, the city around them, shifting gears from day to evening. He lifted a hand, paused. "Can I? Is it okay if I hug you? Goodbye. For today, I mean." The question, simple and careful, undid her. "Yes," she said. He stepped forward slowly, as if approaching a skittish animal. His arms slid around her shoulders, not too tight, not possessive. For a heartbeat, she frozeled, reflexes twitching. Then she let herself lean in, just a little. He smelled like rain and coffee, and something that was no longer the boy she'd left. And not yet the man she might someday trust. She held on long enough to feel the shape of him, to remember that he was real, not just text on a screen or a figure in her memories. Then, she stepped back. "See you at the airport?" he asked, trying for lightness. "Probably," she said. "It's not that big. You underestimate my ability to get lost," he replied. She smiled. "Text me your boarding time later. I'll wave at your gate if I see it. You promise?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "I promise." He left then, walking backward for a few steps, hand raised, almost tripping over the curb and catching himself with a half laugh. She rolled her eyes, but warmth spread through her as she watched him go. Upstairs, her friends pounced with questions, but for once, Maya kept most of the details to herself. She gave them the outline. They walked, they talked. No dramatic fireworks, no raging fights, just two people trying to meet each other on new ground. "That sounds suspiciously healthy," Mina said, squinting. "It sounds like character development," Lila added. That night, over dinner, Maya floated in a strange, buoyant space between worlds. The restaurant was all velvet and low light, couples leaning close, wine glasses catching the glow. Her friends laughed too loud, told stories, took blurry photos. She joined in, raised her glass, let the taste of red wine coat her tongue. But part of her stood on that bridge, watching an invisible version of herself and Adrian trade confessions, like stones dropped into water. Later, back at the apartment, she packed, folding clothes into her suitcase. She found the scarf she'd been wearing the night she saw him on the terrace, its fibers faintly scented with flowers and candle smoke, and something she refused to name. She tucked it between shirts, as if it were any other fabric. Her phone buzzed on the bed. "Gate opens at 9, Adrian had written. "Try not to be fashionably late to my emotional send-off." She smiled, thumbs already moving. "Try not to oversleep and miss your flight like a tragic metaphor," she replied. His answer? "Rude. Accureto. Set 3 alarms. See you tomorrow. Maybe." Maybe? The word hung there, honest and terrifying, and free of pressure. She turned off the light, lay back, listened to her friends breathing, settle into sleep. Outside, Paris exhaled. The rain had stopped. Somewhere, a siren wailed, distant and fading. The tower's lights cycled through their pattern, indifferent and patient. Maya closed her eyes and let herself imagine for the brief space before sleep. Claimed her the possibility of a version of them that could exist without destroying her. Not a guaranteed future. Not a fairy tale. Just a possibility. Airports, she thought the next morning, were the opposite of postcards. They were fluorescent and noisy and full of people in various stages of impatience. The romance of travel of Paris, of new beginnings got stripped away at the security line, with its plastic bins and untying of shoes, its belts removed and laptops exposed. Yet there was a strange comfort in the chaos, in the fact that to the woman checking passports, Maya was just another face. To the man scanning boarding passes, just another last name on a long list. Her friends moved through the procedures as a loose, rowdy pack. There were complaints about the early hour, about overpriced coffee, about the injustice of having to remove carefully tied shoes. There were tearful jokes about leaving the city, already plotting a future reunion trip. At the departure boards, they compared flight numbers. The couples were booked on an earlier route, a cheaper fare, with a layover that everyone would regret only half as much as their credit card balances appreciated it. Leela and Nina were on the same direct flight as Maya but seated several rows behind her. "And you?" Nina asked, juggling her boarding pass. "A croissant and a neck pillow." "Same flight," Maya confirmed, holding up her pass. "Different row. Window or aisle?" "Nira demandetto." "Nira demandetto." "Window," Maya said. "Why?" "Good," Lila replied. "If you stop spiraling about life choices, you can stare dramatically at the clouds, like you're in a music video. Text us if you see Adrian," Nina added. "We'll pretend to casually bump into you so we can assess his airport fashion." Maya scanned the crowds almost unconsciously, stomach fluttering. Part of her had expected unfairly. She knew that he would appear beside her as if conjured, that the universe would double down on its earlier theatrics. Another part of her hoped he was at a completely different terminal, boarding a completely different plane. His existence returning to that manageable distance where it could be wondered about but not touched. She didn't see him. She turned her phone on airplane safe patience mode, trying not to check it every 60 seconds. The time for boarding inched closer. People began to cluster near the gate in that particular Nan line that only existed in airports. Everyone pretending not to be waiting. All of them actually waiting. When the first boarding group was called, Maya hugged her friends tight. "Text when you land," Lila said, squeezing her hard enough to make her ribs creak. "And remember, you don't owe him a relationship. You only owe yourself honesty." "I know," Maya murmured. Nina kissed her cheek. "If he breaks your heart again, I will personally learn to hack his bank accounts and funnel all his money into cat shelters." "Comforting," Maya said, laughing. She joined the line when her group was called, shuffling forward with the others. The boarding pass, when it beeped green, felt like a small, irrevocable choice. As she walked down the jet bridge, the air growing cooler in that strange, metallic way only airplane corridors could manage. She checked her phone one last time. No new messages. She slipped it into her pocket. Inside the plane, the flight attendants greeted passengers with practiced smiles. The cabin smelled of coffee and recycled air, the seats a sea of muted fabric. Maya glanced at her boarding pass again. Matching number 2 row, her step faltered. "Row 3. C." She blinked. "First class." She checked again, heart hammering. She'd booked economy. She remembered the price. The way she'd hovered over the button and then clicked it with a small wince. "Excuse me," she asked the attendant at the front, holding out her pass. "I think there's been a mistake." The woman glanced at it, then smiled. "No mistake. Ms. Reyes, you've been upgraded." "Upgraded," Maya repeated, as if tasting a foreign word. "Yes," the attendant said cheerfully. "Compliments of a full flight and a very kind algorithm. Enjoy the extra legroom." Maya moved forward in a daze. First class looked like a different world. Wider seats, more space. The faint suggestion of luxury even in the way the pillows were arranged. She felt acutely aware of her scuffed boots, of the slightly crooked hem of her sweater. Seat 3A waited by the window. She put her bag up, fingers trembling only slightly, and sank into the seat. The cushion. Her knees rejoiced. The cabin filled slowly. A businessman with silver hair and a sleek briefcase took the aisle seat across from her. A young woman in a tweezer sank into the row in front, immediately pulling a silk eye mask onto her forehead like a headband. The air around her buzzed with quiet conversation and the soft thud of carry-ons being shoved into overhead compartments. Maya glanced down at her phone, more from habit than hope. It vibrated. A new message from an unknown international number she now knew by heart. "Gate change. Chaos," Adrian had written. "Barely made it. If I die in an airport stampede, tell my therapist she was right about my time management issues." She snorted. "Just boarded," she replied. "Got some weird upgrade. I'm in first class for the first time in my life. Trying very hard not to look like I don't belong." His answer arrived almost immediately. "Wait." It read, "Row 3." Her spine tingled. "Yes," she typed, slowly. "Why?" There was a pause, long enough for her pulse to gallop through 3 entire what-ifs. "Then?" "Because I'm staring at C3B," his message said, "and it's empty." Her breath caught. She looked up. The aisle seat beside her was, indeed, unoccupied. At the front of the cabin, a figure appeared, slightly out of breath, hair wind-tousled, backpack slung over one shoulder. Adorian? He paused, scanning the row numbers, his gaze skimming right over her at first, as if his brain refused to connect the possibility. Then, their eyes met. Understanding lit his face, like someone turning on a lamp inside a house at dusk. Of all the flights, of all the algorithms, of all the available seats, in all the complicated machinery of air travel, he moved toward her, boarding pass still clutched in his hand, his expression a wild mix of disbelief and something that looked, for the first time, like pure, unself-conscious joy. The businessman across the aisle glanced up curiously. The attendant at the front did a quick head count, oblivious to the fact that, in row 3, the universe had just rolled its dice and laughed. Apparently, Adrian said softly as he reached her row, the words meant only for her. The world is exactly that small. She couldn't help it. She laughed helpless, bright, a sound full of fear and wonder and the dizzy realization that whatever story they thought they were in, it had just turned a page she'd never seen coming. Outside, the rain-washed runway stretched into the gray. Inside, in row 3, Seat A and Seat B waited, side by side, for takeoff. For a few hot beats, they just stared at each other, the clamor of passengers finding their seats blurring into a distant roar. Adrian looked from Maya to his boarding pass, and back again, as if some cosmic administrator might still appear to tell him there had been a mistake, that this seat actually belonged to someone else, that the world was not, in fact, quite this small. No one came. This is starting to feel scripted, he whispered. Maya's fingers were clenched around the armrest, knuckles pale. She could feel her pulse in her throat, in her wrists, in the soft hollow just below her ribs. Sit down, she managed, voice thin with disbelief. Before they give your seat to someone less dramatic. He let out a breath that turned into a small, giddy laugh, and slid into 3B, dropping his backpack under the seat with less grace than he usually possessed. His elbow brushed hers. The contact felt like striking a match. Hi, he said, as if they hadn't already said hello a dozen times, in a dozen different ways, in a dozen different places over the last week. Hi, she echoed. Because sometimes no new words were needed. A flight attendant stopped at their row, checking overhead bins, offering the practiced smile of someone who had seen everything and believed in nothing surprising. For a treacherous second, Maya wanted to grab the woman's arm and say, Look at this! 2 people with 5 years and 1,000 broken pieces between them, sitting side by side again, by sheer statistical absurdity. Isn't that a kind of miracle? Instead, she buckled her seatbelt. The cabin door thudded shut. The engines hummed, a low animal sound that vibrated through the floor into their bones. Adrian leaned his head back against the seat, exhaling slowly. Okay, he murmured. I know we agreed not to assign meaning to coincidences, but this is getting ridiculous. Maybe the universe just has a flair for drama, she said, eyes fixed on the safety card in front of her. Or maybe it's out of plot ideas and resorting to seat assignment fan service, he replied. She snorted, tension cracking, as the plane taxied. They fell quiet, each folding inward. Takeoffs had always made her uneasy. There was something inherently vulnerable about strapping yourself into a metal tube and trusting physics and strangers to carry you through the sky. She stared out the window. The runway blurred. The city receded. When the wheels finally left the ground, that familiar, weightless lurch made her stomach flip. Unthinkingly, her hand shot out and grabbed the nearest solid thing. Adrian's fingers tightened around hers instantly. Their clasped hands sat between them, a small island of contact in the thin air of first class. She could feel the tremor in his grip, whether from the ascent or from the shock of touching her again. She couldn't say. She didn't pull away. The plane climbed, angling the world below into abstraction. Buildings shrank. Roads became pale veins. The clouds rose to meet them, swallowing the city and its landmarks, the tower, the terrace, the riverenta. A soft, anonymous white. Only when the seatbelt sign chimed off and the plane leveled did she realize she was still holding him. Sorry, she murmured, starting to withdraw. He didn't release her immediately. For one suspended second, he simply looked at their joined hands, his thumb brushing once, almost apologetically, across her knuckles. Are you? he asked quietly. She met his eyes. The question hovered between them, bigger than this small gesture. No, she said. He smiled, not triumphant, just quietly luminous, and loosened his grip, letting her decide. She left her hand where it was. When the flight attendant came by to offer drinks, they sprang apart like teenagers, caught breaking a rule. Maya ordered water. Adrian, in a voice too bright, asked for coffee. The attendant moved on, unfazed. Do you think they get this a lot? He asked. Once she was out of earshot, X's accidentally upgraded into proximity therapy? Probably, Maya said. Airlines, no boundaries. The initial rush of adrenaline began to ebb, leaving behind a clearer awareness of the strangeness and opportunity of their situation. There were no terraces, no rivers, no city, doing its best impression of a love story. Just recycled air, limited legroom, and a handful of hours suspended above the world. No escape. No distractions. What do we talk about now? She asked, only half joking. We could spend the flight ranking airplane snacks by existential despair, he suggested. Already did that in my head, she said. Peanuts win. He grinned, then sobered. Or we could use this time for the thing we keep circling around and never fully landing on. The future, she said. The future, he confirmed. She took a breath, feeling the cabin's pressurized air fill her lungs. Okay, she said. Let's talk about it. For a minute or two, they were silent, both gathering thoughts like fragile objects they weren't sure how to carry. He spoke first. When I picture my life 5 years from now, he said slowly, there's this fork in the road that's been haunting me. In one version, I keep doing what I've been doing. Climbing, impressing, collecting stories that sound good at parties but don't mean much when the door closes at night. It's not teriburu, comfortable, even. But it feels like living in a hotel. Nice. Tidy. Not mine. She listened. Gaze steady. And the other version? She asked. In the other version, he continued, I'm building something. Not just a career. A life that has. He waved his free hand. Searching. Continuity. People who know me on Tuesday afternoons. Not just Saturday nights. Traditions. The kind of boredom that only comes with real intimacy. He glanced at her, then quickly away. In that version, when I imagine someone sitting at my kitchen table, arguing with me about which coffee is better, black or syrup disguised sugar. It's you. Her heart thudded heavily. Adrian, I know, he said quickly. I know that's not something I get to just claim. You're not a character I can drop into a fantasy white picket scenario to make it feel more meaningful. I'm telling you this, not as a sales pitch, but as data. I've tried really hard to imagine that future, with other people. It never sticks. The scenes go blurry. With you, they don't. Silence stretched, filled with the hum of engines and the soft rustle of other passengers, shifting in their seats. And what do you do in those scenes? She asked quietly. In the kitchen. In the life, she clarified. He smiled faintly. I screw up, he said, but differently. Siro, with more awareness. I say sorry without needing a monologue first. I go to therapy because I know I'm not a finished product. I still work too much sometimes. But I come home, I ask how your day was, and actually listen. He turned to face her fully. Maya, I can't promise I'll never hurt you again, he said. No one can promise that. But I can promise I won't make you small to keep myself feeling big. I can promise I won't treat your boundaries like suggestions. I can promise I will not ask you to bleed for my growth. Her eyes burned. She blinked hard, watching the wings slice through cloud. You sound like a brochure for emotionally available men. She tried to joke, but her voice came out rough. He huffed, a humorless laugh. Trust me, there's no brochure. Just a lot of very unglamorous self-inventory. What if? She said, fingers tracing patterns on the armrest. I don't want to be the reward at the end of your growth arc. What if? I just want to be a person you happen to love, while both of us are still figuring things out. Then that's what I want to, he said immediately. No No destinies. Just two idiots trying to be kind to each other on purpose. She looked at him. Really looked. And saw not the boy she'd tried to save, not the villain she'd painted in order to leave, but a man sitting uncomfortably in his own honesty, letting her see him without the flattering angles. And if I can't do it? She asked. If I try and realize, it still hurts too much. If I find I can't forgive enough, or trust enough, or love you the way you need to be loved, then we stop, he said, quietly firm. No campaigns. No guilt. We call it what it was. An attempt. A meaningful one. And we walk away knowing we tried as the people we are now, not as the kids we were then. Her throat tightened. And if I choose not to try at all? She forced herself to ask. He nodded once, jaw working. Then I'll be broken for a while. I won't pretend otherwise, but I'll respect it. I'll go on with my life, grateful that Paris gave me at least the chance to say I'm sorry to the one person I'd always hurt the most. You owe me nothing beyond the truth. She leaned back, letting her head rest against the seat. The ceiling above them curved like the inside of a shell, pale and impersonal. Somewhere beyond it, in a sky they couldn't see, invisible currents held this ridiculous machine aloft. She thought of all the versions of herself she'd been with him. The girl who'd believed love could fix anything. The woman who'd left even though it felt like tearing muscle from bone. The one who'd built a life alone and worn that independence like armor and pride all at once. Who was she now? Maya turned her face to the window. Clouds unfurled below them like a soft, endless field. Sunlight scattered across it in patches, bright and shifting. Paris was behind them, but not gone. Can I tell you something I've never said out loud? She asked. Please, he said. I'm trying to collect rare Maya confessions. They're my new currency. She smiled faintly, then sobered. The day I sent you that message, she began. The one ending things. I wrote another version first, a longer one. Pages? Actually, I was going to explain everything, every hurt, every missed chance. I was going to map it all so you'd understand, so you'd see how much of me I'd poured into us. What happened? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. I realized I wasn't writing for you, she said. I was writing for the part of me that still wanted your approval. I wanted you to say, you're right, Maya, you were good. You were enough. I deleted it, because I knew I had to leave without getting that. He swallowed. You were good, he said hoarsely. You were more than enough. I just didn't know how to receive it without feeling exposed. Like accepting your love meant admitting there was something in me worth that kind of devotion. She blinked hard. 5 years ago, she continued. If you'd said that, I would have thrown myself back into your arms without thinking. I would have called it fate and forgiven everything, even the things I never should have. And now? He asked. Now, she said slowly. I hear it, and I'm glad. For you. For the boy you were who needed to know that. Even if he heard it too late to change your story then. He nodded, staring down at his hands. And for us? He pressed, courage flickering. Does it change anything for us now? She let the question sit. She thought of their week. The terrace, the river, the streets, the coffee, and shared pastries. The way her friends had watched her carefully, ready to swoop in at the first sign of old patterns. She thought of their messages short, silly, sometimes unexpectedly deep. She thought of the way his presence no longer felt like a gravitational field that dragged her out of shape, but more like a weight placed gently beside her, one she could choose to pick up or put down. It's not your apology that changes anything, she said at last. It's who you are when you offer it. He looked up. And who am I? He asked, genuinely wanting to know. She studied him. The faint silvering of exhaustion at his temples, the small lines at the corners of his eyes, etched by both laughter and late nights. The way he sat, not sprawling as if he owned the space, but contained, respectful of the inches between them. You're someone who's finally looking at himself directly, she said, without a funhouse mirror, and someone who doesn't flinch when I do the same. He let out a shaky breath, relief and emotion twisting together. Is that someone you could love? He asked. There? It was. Not cloaked in charm. not framed as a joke. Just a question. Soft and bare. Maya closed her eyes briefly. In her mind's eye, she saw two images, side by side. In one, she stepped back. Let this be their epilogue. A beautiful, improbable meeting in Paris. A week of closure. A plane upgrade that proved life had a sense of humor. And then separate lives. Cleaner, easier stories to tell. In the other, she stepped forward. Not plunging. Not the free-falling. Just moving one measured step into an unknown that scared and intrigued her in equal measure. She opened her eyes. I don't know yet, she said. And I won't pretend otherwise. I don't know if I can love you again the way I did before. I don't even know if I want to. That love burned everything it touched. His face tightened, but he nodded. But, she added, her voice steady, I am curious about whether there's a different kind of love between us now. Something quieter. Something sturdy enough to survive real life. Not just postcards and crises. She turned her hand, palm up, between them, on the armrest. I'm willing to find out, she finished. If you are. He stared at her hand as if it were a rare, fragile artifact someone had entrusted to him. I am, he said. His fingers slid into hers, not possessive, not desperate. Just there. They flew like that for a long time, fingers tangled loosely, talking about nothing and everything. Her next work project. His consideration of a transfer closer to home, the logistics of time zones and phone calls, and the unromantic realities of trying to build anything across countries. When the plane began its descent, the seatbelt sign chimed, their hands separated without drama, each returning to their own armrest. Through the window, land emerged, patchwork fields, snakes of roads, the toy-sized promise of home, as wheels kissed runway, as bodies jolted forward. As overhead bins rattled in protest, Maya realized something quietly monumental. She was not afraid. Not in the way she had been at 22, when the idea of life with or without him had filled her with alternating dread. Not in the way she had been at 23, when she'd woken some mornings and wondered if she'd just ruined her only great love. She was walking into a future with open eyes. Whatever it held for them, for her would be chosen. At baggage claim, the chaos of reunion swallowed them. People hugging across barriers, children weaving between suitcases, announcements buzzing overhead. Lila and Nina found her with the unerring radar of friends on a mission, eyes flicking immediately to Adrian at her side. Well, Nina demanded, hands on her hips, on a scale of 1 to telenovela. How was the flight? Maya glanced at Adrian, then back at her friends. Surprisingly, normal, she said. And also important. Lila scanned Adrian as if measuring his soul. He stood his ground, offering a tentative smile. Hi, he said. I'm the bad ex. With potential. Nina snorted. At least he's self-aware. Lila folded her arms, then stepped forward and, to Maya's utter shock, hugged him briefly. Don't make me regret this, she said into his shoulder. I'll do my incompetent best, he replied. They all laughed, and the sound felt like a small, unofficial blessing. Outside the terminal, in the thin sunlight of their own country, they stood on the sidewalk where taxis came and went, where exhaust hung low and everything smelled less romantic and more like reality. Maya's friends claimed a cab, shouting promises to text later, to call soon, to debrief over wine and bad TV. Then it was just the two of them again. So, Adrian said, shoving his hands into his jacket pockets. Welcome back to the land without Eiffel Towers. Tragic, she murmured. We do have some things Paris doesn't, he added. Like what? He glanced at her, a nervous flicker of mischief in his eyes. My grandmother's house, that field with the wildflowers. The little town where you used to mock my taste in snacks. Her heart skipped. You still go? She asked. Sometimes, he said. Not as often as I should. My aunt keeps inviting me, says the house misses footsteps that aren't hers. Silence stretched, filled with the hiss of buses and the roll of suitcase wheels. Come with me, he said suddenly. Not now. I mean eventually, when it feels right. Let me show you all the places I promised and never did, without the chaos, without the 22-year-old nonsense. She searched his face. "That's a big step," she said. "I know," he replied. "I'm not asking for a yes now. I'm asking if, somewhere in your, maybe, there's room for it." She thought of the postcard that had lived above her desk, now tucked in a box with old notebooks. She thought of the terrace in Paris and the river, and this very unromantic strip of sidewalk. "Ask me again when we've survived a few months of normal," she said. "When we've had fights about stupid things over bad W. When you've heard me complain about my boss 3 weeks in a row and still want to call." His smile widened slowly. "Deal." They exchanged numbers again, not because the old ones didn't work, but because it felt like a ritual. A way of saying, "This is new. Let's treat it as such." They took a photo together on his phone, both of them squinting into the sun. Hair messy from travel. Airport in the background, instead of a romantic skyline. "No filters," she warned. "No filters," he promised. "If we're doing this, we're doing it in HD reality." They said goodbye, then not forever. Not even for long, just for the length of car rides, and unpacking and showers and the first disorienting night, back in their own beds. He watched her get into a cab. She watched him in the side mirror until he blurred into the crowd. The next months unfolded not like a montage, but like real life. There were calls, sometimes long and meandering, sometimes 5 minutes squeezed between meetings. There were text memes, photos of weird snacks, links to articles that made them think of each other. There were awkward moments. The first time he didn't respond for half a day. Old panic rose in her like a tide. She nearly deleted his number. Nearly slammed the door before he could knock. Then his message arrived. "Sorry. Accidentally buried my phone under a mountain of spreadsheets. I am 87% sure it was a cry for help from the universe," she told him, carefully, how that gap had made her feel. He listened. He didn't laugh it off. The next time he knew he'd be unavailable for hours, he sent a simple, "Going off grid for a bit. Talk later." And somehow, that tiny courtesy turned an echoing silence into a comfortable pause. They fought, too, about misread tones in messages, about an offhand joke that poked too close to an old wound, about the fact that sometimes it still hurt to remember. But their fights changed shape. They were less about winning and more about understanding. He learned to say, "You're right," and mean it, without appending a list of his own grievances. She learned to say, "I need space," and believe that he would respect it without disappearing. There were visits. First, he came to her city for a weekend. They didn't make it cinematic. They went grocery shopping together, argued lightly over brands of pasta, cooked in her too small kitchen. On Sunday morning, she found his toothbrush next to hers and felt a bolt of fear, and then, slowly, a surprising tenderness. Later, she flew to his. He met her at the airport, of course, because some rituals, once broken, you never repeat. His apartment was full of small, unexpected signs of growth. Cookbooks with notes in the margins, plants that were not only alive but thriving, a framed photograph of his grandmother on a shelf, watching over the room with amused eyes. "Is she judging me?" Maya whispered. "Only a little," he said. "She has high standards." Bit by bit, a new story wove itself between them. Not a straight line, not without missteps, but forward. And then, one spring, when the world had tilted fully toward warmth again, and the wildflowers in his aunt's messages were at their annual riot, he asked her once more. They were lying on his couch, a movie forgotten on the screen, her feet in his lap, his fingers drawing idle patterns on her ankle. "Come to the country with me," he said. "This weekend. No production. No expectations. Just, let me show you the place where I first dreamed of anywhere else." She studied his face, the way his eyes held both eagerness and restraint. "Yes," she said. They drove out of the city before dawn, the world still washed in gray. The highway thinned into smaller roads. The smaller roads wound into lanes, framed by trees. Fields unfurled on either side, dotted with cows that watched their passing with slow, bovine The house appeared at the crest of a gentle hill, its stone walls warmed by years, its windows like half-closed eyes. The air smelled different here. Somehow, thick with grass and earth and whatever indefinable thing clung to places that had held generations of the same stories. His aunt greeted them with brisk affection and too much food. She hugged Maya as if they were old friends, then scolded Adrian for not visiting enough. They ate at the big wooden table, sunlight streaming through the open door, dust motes floating like lazy ghosts. After lunch, they walked. He took her through the fields his grandmother had once described, the ones he'd rendered into cartoonish fantasies for her in the cafe years ago. The wildflowers were everywhere, painting the land in strokes of yellow, white, purple. Bees moved among them, drunk on possibility. "This is where I used to lie on my back and stare at the sky," he said, dropping into the grass, imagining other horizons. She lay beside him, the earth firm and cool beneath her, the sky stretched above, a wide, unbroken blue. "Do they look different now?" she asked. "The horizons?" he said. "Yeah. Back then, they were escape routes. Now they're options." He turned his head to look at her. "And you?" he asked. "How does this look compared to what you pictured, hearing my stories in that old cafe?" She smiled up at the sky. "Less glamorous," she said. "More real? I like this version better." A breeze moved through the grass, brushing over them like a quiet blessing. He reached for her hand not as a question this time, but as a habit that had grown roots. She laced their fingers together. In the distance, the house stood watchful and steady. Somewhere nearby, a bird trilled a bright, insistential songa. The sun warmed their faces. The earth held their backs. It struck her then, with a clarity that was almost painful. How far they'd come, not in miles, though there had been many, but in the inner distance between the people they had been and the ones they were now. She had left him once because staying meant losing herself. Now, lying there with his hand in hers, she felt not smaller, but somehow more wholly herself than she had in years. "Maya," he said softly. She turned her head. The look on his face was not the wild, raw intensity of their first love, that fevered certainty that they were the only two people in the world who had ever felt this much. It was something quieter, steadier, something that had grown, not exploded. "I love you," he said. "Not the memory of you, not just the idea of you. You, exactly as you are, exactly as we are, in this very unremarkable, perfect moment." Her eyes stung. "I love you too," she said. "Not as a project, not as a sacrifice, just as you." They lay there, side by side, hands entwined, staring up at a sky that had contained every version of their story and would outlast them all. Later, they would go back to the town where they'd met tall, cracked sidewalks and familiar corners. They would walk past the cafe with the delayed bell, now with renovated walls and a new espresso machine, and laugh at how small it looked. They'd order coffee, hers still too bitter, his still an excuse for sugar, and sit by the window. "Remember when we thought this was the whole world?" she'd say. "It was," he'd answer. "For a while." They'd talk about Paris, about the terrace and the river and that absurd upgrade. They'd make plans, some concrete, some tentative, trips they wanted to take, traditions they wanted to start, ways to keep choosing each other, not out of habit or fear, but out of deliberate, ongoing will. They would fight again, of course. They would misunderstand each other, hurt each other in new, smaller ways. There would be slammed doors and long walks, and the occasional night spent on opposite sides of the bed, backs turned. But now, tucked inside all of that, there would also be this. A terrace framed in pink flowers over Paris, a riverbank, under low clouds, a row of first-class seats humming 30,000 feet above the earth, a wildflower field behind an old stone house, markers. Proof that life, in its stubborn, messy way, sometimes bent toward repair. Years later, when people asked them how they'd met, they'd exchange a glance and trade the easy answer at a cafe when we were young, for the longer, truer one, when they felt the listener could hold it. "We met twice," Maya would say. "We fell in love before we were ready and nearly ruined each other, then learned how to love ourselves apart. And then," Adrian would add, "we found each other again on a Valentine's Day in Paris, on a terrace that looked like a dream we'd once had, and realize the world is tiny and terrifying and big enough for second chances. They would not credit fate entirely, nor algorithms, nor seat upgrades, nor postcards. They'd know that, in the end, it wasn't any single coincidence that had saved them, but the hundreds of small, daily choices they'd made afterward. To be honest, to be kind, to stay curious about each other, even when it was hard. On some future evening, older and softer at the edges, they might find themselves once more on a balcony maybe. Not in Paris, maybe just outside their own modest apartment, candles flickering on a table, city lights spread out below in whatever pattern of streets their lives had woven. Maya would wrap her hands around a mug of coffee, wince at the first sip, and smile. "Still awful," she'd say. "Still dramatic," he'd answer, leaning his shoulder against hers. They'd fall quiet then, watching the horizon, not waiting for magic, not holding their breath for the other shoe to drop. Just existing together in the simple, astonishing fact of a love that had burned, broken, and rebuilt itself, not into a perfect fairy tale, but into something far rarer. A home, and somewhere, on a shelf or in a box, or pressed between pages of an old notebook, a faded postcard of Paris would rest, corners curled, colors dulled, edges soft from being handled too often. Not an unfinished promise anymore. Just the first page of a story that had taken the long way around to find its way back to itself.